Hey guys, tonight we're stepping back through the mists of time to witness something that might shock you. What medieval weddings were actually like. Picture yourself standing in a smoky great hall, watching a 12-year-old girl being handed over to a man she's never met, while her father counts silver coins and discusses sheep as part of her dowry. The bride's hands tremble not from joy, but from terror, as she realizes this moment will define the rest of her life. You smell the unwashed bodies of guests, hear the crude jokes being shouted across wooden tables, and witness ceremonies that would make modern couples recoil in horror. The story may solve mysteries you never had an explanation for, about why our own wedding traditions feel so strangely formal and ritualistic. So, before you explore the story with me, please take a moment to help me subscribe to the channel, like and share this video. Or maybe leave a comment below, but make sure you do it when you really like what I bring to you. Let me know in the comments where and when you started watching this video, or perhaps share what surprises you most about medieval life. Now, let's keep the lights as soft as possible. Turn on the fan for a gentle sound to help the story feel more emotional, and let's embark on tonight's journey together. You find yourself transported to medieval Europe, where marriage isn't about love, it's about survival, politics, and cold hard economics. In this world, you witness parents treating their children like valuable commodities, negotiating marriages the same way merchants haggle over grain prices. The concept of marrying for love exists only in the romantic tales sung by wandering minstrels, and even then, those stories usually end in tragedy. You observe how medieval society operates on a simple principle: marriage creates alliances. When you watch a noble father arrange his daughter's marriage, you're witnessing diplomacy in its rawest form. Two families aren't just joining together, they're forming military partnerships, combining lands, settling debts, and sometimes preventing wars. The bride and groom are merely the instruments through which these larger political symphonies are played. As you move through medieval villages, you notice how different social classes approach arranged marriages. Among peasants, you see parents desperately trying to secure their daughter's future by finding her a husband with enough land to keep her from starvation. The calculations are brutally practical. Can he feed her? Will he beat her less than others might? Does his family have a reputation for letting wives live past childbirth? You discover that medieval people aren't entirely heartless about these arrangements. Parents genuinely believe they're protecting their children by choosing spouses wisely. They've seen too many marriages destroyed by passion. Too many young people make foolish choices based on fleeting attractions. In their minds, you realize, they're being loving by being practical. The medieval church plays a fascinating role in this system that you observe unfolding. While promoting arranged marriages as godly and proper, church teachings also insist that both bride and groom must consent to the union. This creates an interesting tension you witness in countless ceremonies, fathers demanding obedience while priests require genuine agreement. Many young people learn to navigate this carefully, giving technical consent while harboring private reservations. You notice how age plays a crucial role in these arrangements. Noble families often betroth their children in infancy, treating marriage contracts like investment portfolios. You watch parents calculating which alliance might prove most valuable 15 years in the future, hedging their bets against political changes they can only guess at. The children involved have no say in these early betrothals, growing up knowing their fates have already been sealed by negotiations they weren't present for. Medieval women, you observe, develop sophisticated strategies for surviving in this system. They learn to read between the lines of marriage negotiations, gathering intelligence about potential husbands through networks of servants, relatives, and other women. You see them cultivating skills that might make them more valuable wives. Not just traditional domestic abilities, but also literacy, music, and sometimes even basic medicine or accounting. The economics behind arranged marriages fascinate you as you delve deeper. Families treat marriages like modern corporations handle mergers, conducting what amounts to financial due diligence on potential partners. You witness fathers hiring investigators to verify claims about land ownership, livestock quantities, and family debts. Some families even require written guarantees about the groom's sexual performance and fertility, documents that would make modern lawyers blush. You observe the intricate matchmaking networks that develop across medieval Europe. Professional marriage brokers emerge, travelling from castle to castle with detailed knowledge of available heirs and heiresses. These medieval headhunters maintain careful records of bloodlines, debts, political affiliations, and even personality quirks that might affect marital harmony. They charge substantial fees for their services, understanding that a well-arranged marriage can determine a family's prosperity for generations. The role of extended family in these arrangements creates layers of complexity you find mesmerizing. Grandparents often have stronger voices in marriage decisions than the actual parents, wielding their experience and remaining wealth to influence choices. Aunts and uncles contribute opinions based on their own marital successes or failures. You witness family councils that resemble medieval parliaments, with various relatives arguing passionately about the merits of different potential matches. You discover that medieval arranged marriages often include escape clauses that would surprise modern observers. Some contracts specify conditions under which the marriage can be dissolved, if the groom proves impotent, if either party develops certain diseases, or if previously hidden debts come to light. These provisions reveal that medieval people, despite their reputation for rigid thinking, understood that even the best-laid matrimonial plans could go disastrously wrong. The psychological preparation for arranged marriages involves rituals you find both touching and disturbing. Young people receive coaching from older relatives about their marital duties, with conversations that range from practical household management to intimate physical expectations. You observe mothers teaching daughters how to survive potentially violent husbands, while fathers instruct sons on managing wives like they might manage livestock, with firm authority but also practical care for valuable property. The waiting periods between arrangement and marriage create their own unique tensions. Betrothed couples sometimes correspond through letters, carefully supervised by family members, attempting to build some connection before their wedding day. You witness the awkward dance of these epistolary courtships, where young people try to express personality and preference within the rigid boundaries their families have established. Historians still argue whether medieval arranged marriages were actually less happy than modern love marriages. Some evidence suggests that couples who entered marriage with realistic expectations and shared goals often developed genuine affection over time. You see examples of arranged couples who became devoted partners, their initial awkwardness blossoming into deep companionship through shared struggles and successes. The system wasn't without its rebels, and you encounter stories of young people who defied their parents' arrangements. Some fled to distant cities, others sought sanctuary in monasteries, and a few brave souls eloped despite knowing they'd be disinherited. These acts of rebellion were rare, not because medieval people lacked romantic feelings, but because the consequences of defying arranged marriages were usually catastrophic: social exile, poverty, and sometimes violence. You begin to understand that medieval arranged marriages created their own form of romance, different from modern ideals but no less meaningful to those who lived it. Couples learned to find love within the boundaries their families had set, discovering intimacy through shared responsibilities rather than initial passion. Their letters and diaries, when they exist, reveal relationships that grew stronger through practical partnership, mutual respect developing where modern couples might expect immediate chemistry. As you prepare to explore the specific rituals and customs that made these arranged unions official, you carry with you the knowledge that medieval marriage was simultaneously more calculating and more hopeful than modern relationships. calculating because survival depended on making smart choices, hopeful because people believed that commitment and time could transform any practical arrangement into something resembling love. You witness the moment when medieval families move from whispered negotiations to formal declarations, entering the elaborate world of betrothal ceremonies that seal fates with all the gravity of international treaties. The air grows thick with incense and anticipation as you observe rituals that transform casual discussions into binding spiritual contracts. Watched by witnesses who understand they're participating in something far more consequential than modern engagements, standing in a lord's great hall, you watch as the betrothal ceremony begins with the reading of detailed contracts that sound more like military alliances than romantic commitments. The scribe's voice echoes off stone walls as he recites clauses covering everything from inheritance rights to what happens if either party dies before the wedding. You notice how the young couple barely glances at each other, their attention focused on the legal machinery grinding around them like some unstoppable medieval bureaucracy. The exchange of betrothal gifts fascinates you with its calculated symbolism. You observe the groom's family presenting elaborate tokens, rings, brooches, or ceremonial weapons that represent not affection but financial commitment. Each gift carries specific meaning. A ring symbolizes eternal binding. A brooch indicates the bride's future status. While weapons suggest the groom's ability to protect his new family, the bride's family responds with gifts that demonstrate their own wealth and the value they place on their daughter. You discover that betrothal ceremonies vary dramatically based on social class, creating a complex hierarchy of ritual significance. Among nobles, you witness events that last for days, with elaborate feasts, entertainment, and ceremonies that rival royal coronations. The families invite witnesses from across the region, understanding that the more people who observe the betrothal, the harder it becomes for either party to back out later. These witnesses aren't just guests, they're insurance policies against future disputes. Medieval church law adds layers of complexity to betrothal that you find both fascinating and bewildering. The church insists that betrothal creates a spiritual bond almost as strong as marriage itself, making it extremely difficult to dissolve once completed. You observe priests blessing the engaged couple with the same solemnity they bring to actual weddings, emphasizing that this moment creates obligations that extend far beyond earthly concerns into the realm of eternal salvation. The timing between betrothal and wedding creates its own ritualistic significance that you notice varies by region and class. Wealthy families often schedule betrothals years before weddings, using the intervening time to finalize complex financial arrangements and allow young brides to mature. You watch families calculating these timelines with astronomical precision, considering everything from harvest seasons to political stability when determining wedding dates. You observe the fascinating role that betrothal rings play in these ceremonies. Though they look nothing like modern engagement rings, medieval betrothal rings often feature religious inscriptions in Latin, tiny carved hands clasping together, or even miniature keys symbolizing the bride's future domestic authority. Some rings split into two pieces that fit together, with each party keeping half until the wedding reunites them, a physical representation of incomplete union awaiting fulfillment. The public nature of medieval betrothals strikes you as both protective and oppressive. Families announce engagements in churches, at market days, and during major festivals, ensuring that entire communities become invested in seeing the marriage through to completion. This publicity serves practical purposes. It prevents either family from secretly negotiating other marriages, while also creating social pressure that makes abandonment extremely costly in terms of reputation. Medieval betrothal ceremonies include vow exchanges that sound surprisingly similar to modern wedding vows, though their legal implications differ dramatically. You hear young couples promising to honour, cherish, and remain faithful to each other, words that carry immediate legal weight even though the marriage hasn't been consummated. Breaking these betrothal vows could result in church penalties, financial forfeiture, and social ostracism that might last lifetimes. The role of professional witnesses at betrothals creates an entire industry of people whose job involves remembering exactly what was said and done during the ceremonies. You observe elderly men and women who specialize in memorizing betrothal details, understanding that their testimony might be crucial years later if legal disputes arise. These human record keepers develop extraordinary memories, capable of reciting word-for-word conversations that occurred decades earlier. You notice how betrothal ceremonies handle the delicate issue of consent, particularly regarding young brides who might be genuinely terrified of their arranged futures. Priests develop elaborate questioning techniques designed to ensure that consent is freely given. Though the definition of freely remains flexible when family pressure and economic necessity limit real choices, you observe the careful dance between religious requirements and family expectations, watching as ceremonies balance spiritual authenticity with practical politics. The celebration aspects of betrothal reveal medieval attitudes toward joy and solemnity that you find surprisingly complex. Families organize feasts, dancing, and entertainment that seem designed to convince everyone, including the couple, that this arrangement will bring happiness. Musicians perform songs about faithful love and marital bliss, while guests offer toasts celebrating the wisdom of the match. Yet underneath this festivity, you sense the underlying anxiety that pervades any life-changing commitment made without personal choice. Medieval betrothal ceremonies often include elaborate theatrical elements that transform private family decisions into public spectacles. You watch as families hire professional entertainers to perform allegories about successful marriages, commission poets to compose verses celebrating the match, and organize elaborate tableaux vivants depicting biblical couples like Abraham and Sarah. These performances serve dual purposes. They entertain guests while also reinforcing cultural narratives about marital duty and divine blessing. The exchange of personal items during betrothal creates intimate moments within otherwise formal ceremonies. You observe brides giving grooms locks of hair carefully braided with ribbons, while grooms present brides with personal devotional objects like prayer beads or miniature religious books. These tokens represent the only genuinely personal elements in ceremonies otherwise dominated by family politics and legal formalities. The seasonal timing of betrothals follows patterns you discover have both practical and superstitious origins. Spring betrothals are considered especially auspicious because they align with natural cycles of renewal and fertility. Families avoid certain months deemed unlucky, particularly May, which medieval people associate with witchcraft and sexual impropriety. These timing decisions reflect deep-seated beliefs about cosmic influences on human relationships that persist despite church teachings about divine providence. Historians still argue whether medieval betrothals were more or less stressful than modern engagements, given their different social functions and expectations. Some evidence suggests that the formal, ritualized nature of betrothal provided comfort through certainty, removing the anxiety of wondering whether relationships would last. Others argue that the binding nature of these ceremonies created psychological pressure that modern couples can barely imagine. You discover that betrothal ceremonies often include bizarre rituals that seem to blend Christian symbolism with much older pagan traditions. Some regions require couples to drink from the same cup, share bread blessed by priests, or even exchange blood by pricking their fingers with ceremonial daggers. These ancient practices persist despite church disapproval, suggesting that medieval people need rituals that feel more visceral and binding than mere legal formalities. The role of mothers during betrothal ceremonies reveals complex gender dynamics that you find both touching and troubling. You watch mothers coaching their daughters through the ceremony, whispering instructions about when to speak, how to stand, and what expressions to maintain. These maternal interventions suggest both protective care and recognition that young women need guidance to survive systems designed largely by and for men. Medieval betrothal gifts sometimes include items that modern people would find shocking or hilarious. Grooms present brides with household keys, spinning wheels, prayer books, or even livestock. Practical gifts that emphasize the bride's future domestic responsibilities rather than romantic sentiment. Brides give grooms items like embroidered clothing, weapons, or religious relics that demonstrate their needlework skills and spiritual devotion rather than emotional attachment. The waiting period between betrothal and marriage creates unique opportunities for couples to develop relationships within carefully controlled boundaries. You observe supervised visits where engaged couples can converse, share meals, and begin building familiarity while chaperoned by relatives. These interactions often represent the only chance for medieval couples to discover whether they might actually like each other before committing to lifelong partnership. As you witness these elaborate betrothal ceremonies, you begin to understand how they serve as dress rehearsals for the even more complex rituals of medieval weddings. Every gesture, word, and symbolic exchange prepares participants for the ultimate ceremony that will follow, creating familiarity with processes that determine the rest of their lives while surrounded by communities invested in their success. You enter the smoky chambers where medieval fathers conduct marriage negotiations with the same intensity that modern corporate lawyers bring to billion-dollar mergers. The scratching of quill pens on parchment mingles with heated arguments about livestock values, land boundaries, and the monetary worth of virginity itself. Here, in these windowless rooms lit by flickering candles, you witness conversations that reduce human beings to itemized lists of assets and liabilities, where a daughter's beauty might be weighed against a son's inheritance prospects with mathematical precision. The dowry system you observe operates on principles that would shock modern sensibilities, yet it represents the backbone of medieval economic survival. Families treat their daughters' dowries like investment portfolios, carefully accumulating goods, money, and property rights over years or even decades before marriage becomes possible. You watch mothers embroidering linens from the time their daughters can walk, fathers setting aside portions of harvests season after season, all building toward the moment when these accumulated treasures will determine their child's matrimonial fate. Standing beside negotiating tables, you witness the brutal mathematics of medieval marriage economics. Fathers calculate their daughter's worth based on beauty, skills, family connections, and reproductive potential, then attempt to extract maximum value from prospective grooms' families. These conversations unfold with the emotional detachment of livestock auctions, as men discuss their children's futures in terms of acreage, grain yields, and breeding stock valuations. You discover that dowry negotiations can stretch across months or even years, with families employing sophisticated bargaining strategies that would impress modern diplomats. Each side hires advisors, usually older women with reputations for shrewd judgment, who assess the true value of proposed exchanges. These medieval marriage consultants maintain detailed knowledge of regional property values, family debt situations, and even gossip about potential grooms' sexual capabilities or drinking habits. The contents of medieval dowries fascinate you with their bizarre mixture of practical necessities and symbolic gestures. You observe families assembling collections that might include dozens of sheep, carefully crafted household linens, religious relics, jewellery, furniture, and sometimes even entire mills or workshops. Each item serves dual purposes: practical utility in the bride's future household, and demonstration of her family's wealth and status to the community. Medieval dowry contracts read like inventory lists from particularly thorough estate sales. You examine documents that specify exactly how many beds, cooking pots, silver spoons, and bolts of cloth the bride will bring to her marriage. Some contracts even detail the thread counts of linens or the precise weight of silver jewellery. Understanding that these specifics might become crucial if marital disputes lead to legal battles over property division. The negotiation of future inheritance rights adds layers of complexity to dowry discussions that you find both fascinating and disturbing. Families argue about what happens as dowry property if the wife dies childless, if the husband predeceases his wife, or if marriages end in annulment. These contingency planning sessions reveal how medieval people approach marriage as temporary arrangements that might dissolve for various reasons, requiring careful legal preparation for multiple scenarios. You notice how dowry negotiations reflect broader social anxieties about women's economic security in patriarchal societies. Since medieval women cannot typically inherit family property directly, their dowries represent their only guaranteed economic resources. Families understand that skimping on daughters' dowries might condemn them to poverty or abuse in marriages where they have no financial leverage to protect themselves. The seasonal timing of dowry negotiations follows patterns connected to agricultural cycles and religious calendars. You observe families scheduling these discussions during winter months when farm work slackens and men have time for extended business conversations. The rhythm of negotiation often parallels the agricultural year: initial discussions during harvest season, serious bargaining through winter, and final agreements as spring planting begins. The involvement of professional appraisers in dowry negotiations creates an entire medieval industry of experts who specialize in valuing marriage assets. You watch these assessors examining livestock teeth to determine age, testing fabric quality by burning small samples, and even consulting astronomical charts to determine the most auspicious timing for property transfers. Their expertise commands substantial fees, but families consider these costs essential investments in securing accurate valuations. The psychological warfare embedded in dowry negotiations reveals sophisticated understanding of human motivation and social pressure. You observe families deliberately delaying responses to proposals, spreading rumours about competing offers, and staging elaborate displays of wealth designed to intimidate negotiating partners. These tactics demonstrate that medieval people understand the psychological dimensions of business negotiations as clearly as any modern deal-maker. Regional variations in dowry customs create a patchwork of traditions across medieval Europe that you find endlessly intriguing. Italian families focus heavily on cash payments and urban property, while English families emphasize land rights and livestock. German regions develop elaborate systems of delayed dowry payments that spread costs across years, while French families create dowries that emphasize luxury goods and artistic objects that demonstrate cultural refinement. You discover that dowry fraud represents a significant concern in medieval society, leading to the development of sophisticated verification procedures. Families hire independent assessors to examine proposed livestock, test the quality of textiles, and verify the authenticity of precious metals. These medieval due diligence processes can take weeks, with experts travelling between properties to conduct detailed inspections of assets that might determine a family's economic future. The psychological impact of dowry negotiations on young women creates stresses that you observe manifesting in various ways. Daughters watch their fathers reducing them to commodity lists, hearing their personal qualities discussed in terms of market value and exchange rates. Some young women develop sophisticated understanding of their own economic worth, while others retreat into silence or religious devotion to escape the dehumanizing aspects of these business transactions. Medieval mothers play complex roles in dowry negotiations that reveal the contradictions of women's positions in patriarchal societies. You watch mothers fiercely advocating for their daughters' interests, while simultaneously accepting systems that treat women as valuable property to be transferred between male-headed households. These maternal interventions often focus on practical concerns, ensuring daughters receive adequate household goods and maintaining some connection to natal families after marriage. The relationship between dowry size and marital power fascinates you as you observe how economic contributions affect household dynamics. Wives who bring substantial dowries often enjoy greater authority in their marriages, using their financial contributions as leverage in domestic disputes. Conversely, women with smaller dowries might find themselves more vulnerable to husbands who feel they received inadequate compensation for taking on matrimonial responsibilities. The creation of dowry inventories requires meticulous record-keeping that transforms medieval households into temporary accounting firms. You watch families hiring scribes to create detailed catalogues of dowry contents, complete with descriptions, valuations, and condition assessments. These documents often become family heirlooms, preserved for generations as proof of ancestral wealth and evidence for potential future legal disputes. Historians still argue whether medieval dowry systems provided more security or created greater vulnerability for women compared to modern marriage arrangements. Some evidence suggests that dowries gave women concrete property rights and economic standing within their marriages. Other scholars argue that reducing women to their economic contributions reinforced their subordinate status and made them more vulnerable to abuse if their dowries proved insufficient. The documentation surrounding dowry negotiations reveals sophisticated legal thinking about property rights, inheritance law, and marital obligations. You examine contracts that anticipate complex scenarios involving death, divorce, remarriage, and even religious conversion. These legal instruments demonstrate that medieval people, despite stereotypes about primitive thinking, develop nuanced understanding of how economic arrangements affect human relationships over time. You discover that dowry negotiations often include bizarre clauses that reflect medieval concerns about reputation, sexuality, and social standing. Some contracts specify penalties if brides prove not to be virgins, while others include provisions about what happens if wives fail to produce male heirs within certain time frames. These intimate concerns become matters of legal and financial discussion, revealing how medieval society treats private matters as public economic interests. The role of extended family networks in dowry negotiations creates systems of mutual obligation and support that extend far beyond individual marriages. You observe aunts, uncles, grandparents, and even family friends contributing to dowries, understanding that successful marriages strengthen entire kinship networks, while failed arrangements can damage reputations and economic prospects for generations. As you witness these intense dowry negotiations, you begin to understand how they establish the economic foundations upon which medieval marriages will either thrive or struggle, setting up power dynamics and resource distributions that will influence every aspect of couples' future lives together. You step into the shadowed world where medieval church doctrine transforms marriage from a simple civil arrangement into a sacred battleground of competing authorities, witnessing how religious law slowly conquers ancient customs with the persistence of water carving through stone. The musty smell of parchment and beeswax candles fills monastery scriptoriums, where monks debate the theological implications of consummation, consent, and the precise moment when two souls become one flesh in God's eyes. The medieval church's grip on marriage tightens gradually across centuries, and you observe this institutional takeover happening village by village, family by family. Initially, marriage remains largely secular. Couples exchange vows in fields, taverns, or family homes with minimal religious oversight. But as church power grows, you watch ecclesiastical authorities methodically claiming jurisdiction over matrimonial matters, insisting that marriage represents a sacrament requiring priestly supervision and divine blessing to achieve validity. Canon law creates labyrinthine regulations that you find both ingenious and oppressive, establishing rules that seem designed to give church authorities maximum control over human relationships. You witness priests wielding complex impediment charts, that can invalidate marriages based on blood relationships extended to seventh cousins, spiritual kinships created through godparent relationships, or even previous sexual relationships that create mystical bonds transcending death itself. The Church's insistence on free consent revolutionizes medieval marriage in ways that surprise modern observers who assume religious authorities always supported patriarchal control. You watch priests conducting elaborate questioning sessions with prospective brides and grooms, probing for evidence of coercion or family pressure. These investigations sometimes result in dramatic confrontations where young people openly defy their parents' arrangements, claiming church protection for their right to refuse unwanted marriages. You discover that church marriage law creates fascinating contradictions between spiritual ideals and practical realities. While promoting marriage as a sacred bond reflecting Christ's relationship with the church, ecclesiastical authorities simultaneously treat it as a legal contract requiring careful documentation and procedural correctness. You observe priests blessing unions while simultaneously cataloguing potential grounds for future annulment, understanding that even sacred bonds might require dissolution under certain circumstances. The development of marriage as a sacrament unfolds through theological debates that you witness in cathedral schools and monastery libraries. Scholars argue about whether marriage achieves sacramental status through the exchange of vows, physical consummation, or divine blessing, with different conclusions carrying profound implications for church authority over matrimonial matters. These academic discussions directly affect ordinary people's lives as changing theological fashions alter the requirements for valid marriages. Medieval church authorities developed sophisticated procedures for investigating marriage disputes that rival modern court systems in their complexity and thoroughness. You watch ecclesiastical judges conducting detailed examinations of wedding witnesses, inspecting marriage contracts for canonical violations, and even ordering physical examinations to determine whether marriages have been properly consummated. These investigations can last months or years, during which couples exist in matrimonial limbo with uncertain legal status. The Church's approach to marriage impediments creates opportunities for both protection and manipulation that you observe being exploited by various parties. Wealthy families sometimes discover convenient impediments when politically advantageous marriages become inconvenient. While poor families might face impediment claims that seem designed to prevent socially undesirable unions, the complex web of prohibited relationships provides ammunition for anyone seeking to challenge marriages that threaten existing power structures. You notice how church marriage law varies significantly across different regions and time periods, reflecting ongoing tensions between local customs and universal ecclesiastical authority. French church practices differ from Italian approaches, while English ecclesiastical courts develop their own procedural traditions. These regional variations create opportunities for jurisdiction shopping, where couples might travel to areas with more favourable marriage laws or more sympathetic church authorities. The role of church blessing in medieval weddings evolves from optional enhancement to mandatory requirement, and you witness this transformation happening gradually across Europe. Early medieval couples might seek priestly blessing for luck or divine favour, but later church law makes religious ceremonies essential for marriage validity. This shift represents one of the most significant changes in Western marriage customs, transforming what had been primarily secular institutions into fundamentally religious sacraments. Church authorities develop elaborate ceremonial requirements that transform simple vow exchanges into complex liturgical performances. You observe the emergence of standardized wedding masses, specific readings from scripture, and prescribed prayers that must be recited in exact sequences. These ceremonial innovations serve multiple purposes. They demonstrate church authority over matrimonial matters, while also creating memorable experiences that reinforce religious teachings about marital obligations. the training of priests in marriage law becomes a specialized field that you witness developing across medieval universities and theological schools. Young clerics study complex texts dealing with impediment calculations, consanguinity charts, and canonical procedures for marriage validation. This educational emphasis creates a professional class of ecclesiastical lawyers who make careers from navigating the intricate maze of church marriage regulations. The Church's teachings about marital sexuality create fascinating tensions between spiritual ideals and biological realities that you see playing out in confession manuals and marriage preparation guides. Priests must counsel couples about their conjugal duties while maintaining that sexual pleasure represents spiritual danger. These contradictions produce elaborate theological gymnastics as church authorities attempt to sanctify necessary biological functions while maintaining that celibacy represents the higher spiritual path. The development of church marriage records creates the foundation for modern vital statistic systems that you observe emerging in cathedral archives across medieval Europe. Priests begin maintaining detailed registers of marriages performed, creating permanent documentation that serves both religious and secular purposes. These records become crucial evidence in inheritance disputes, legitimacy questions, and property transfers that might occur decades after the original ceremonies. Medieval church law creates intricate procedures for marriage annulment that you find both protective and potentially exploitative. While providing escape routes from truly harmful unions, these procedures also enable wealthy or powerful individuals to dissolve inconvenient marriages through technical violations of canonical requirements. You observe cases where marriages lasting decades can be retroactively declared invalid due to previously unknown impediments or procedural irregularities. The Church's insistence on publicity for marriages serves both spiritual and practical purposes that you witness transforming wedding customs across medieval Europe. Religious authorities require marriages to be announced publicly, celebrated openly, and witnessed by community members to prevent secret unions that might facilitate bigamy, adultery, or property fraud. This publicity requirement gradually transforms marriages from private family matters into community celebrations requiring broader social participation. You discover that church marriage courts develop sophisticated legal procedures that influence secular law development for centuries. Ecclesiastical judges create precedent systems, establish evidence rules, and develop appellate procedures that serve as models for emerging civil court systems. The Church's matrimonial jurisdiction becomes a laboratory for legal innovation that extends far beyond religious matters into broader questions of contractual obligation and individual rights. The theological implications of marriage as sacrament create philosophical puzzles that medieval scholars spend lifetimes attempting to resolve. You observe debates about whether marriage exists primarily for procreation, a companionship, or spiritual symbolism, with different conclusions affecting church teachings about contraception, divorce, and remarriage. These academic discussions have immediate practical consequences for ordinary couples seeking church guidance about their matrimonial obligations. The enforcement of church marriage law requires cooperation between ecclesiastical and secular authorities that you witness creating complex political relationships across medieval Europe. Bishops need royal support to enforce their matrimonial decisions, while kings sometimes require church sanction for their own marital arrangements. These interdependent relationships shape both religious and political development throughout the medieval period. Historians still argue whether church involvement in medieval marriage provided more protection or created additional burdens for ordinary people seeking to form stable relationships. Some evidence suggests that ecclesiastical oversight prevented some abusive arrangements and provided legal recourse for matrimonial disputes. Other scholars argue that church requirements added expensive complexity to simple arrangements while creating new opportunities for powerful interests to manipulate marriage law for political advantage. The relationship between church marriage law and secular authority creates ongoing jurisdictional conflicts that you witness playing out in courts. Castles and village squares across medieval Europe. Kings and nobles sometimes support church marriage jurisdiction when it serves their interests, while resisting ecclesiastical authority when it threatens their political arrangements. These power struggles shape marriage law development in ways that affect ordinary couples for generations. As you observe the Church's gradual conquest of matrimonial authority, you begin to understand how religious institutions transform private relationships into public sacraments, creating the foundation for Western marriage traditions that persist into modern times while establishing precedents for institutional control over intimate human relationships that continue to influence contemporary debates about marriage, sexuality, and individual autonomy. You stand before medieval brides whose wedding attire would shatter every modern assumption about bridal fashion, watching women prepare for their most important day wearing colours that span the entire rainbow except the white that contemporary culture considers essential. The rustle of rich fabrics fills chambers where seamstresses work by candlelight, stitching elaborate gowns in deep blues, vibrant reds, golden yellows, and forest greens that demonstrate wealth, status, and family allegiance rather than any symbolic purity that white might represent. Medieval brides approach their wedding wardrobe with the strategic thinking of military commanders preparing for battle, understanding that their clothing choices will communicate complex messages about family wealth, personal virtue, and future household management capabilities. You observe young women consulting with mothers, aunts, and professional seamstresses about fabrics that must balance luxury with practicality, colours that honour family traditions while appealing to their future in-laws, and styles that demonstrate both modesty and marriageability. The absence of white wedding dresses in medieval ceremonies initially surprises you until you discover the practical and symbolic reasons behind this difference. White fabric represents enormous expense and impracticality in an era before modern bleaching techniques and frequent washing capabilities. More importantly, white clothing carries associations with mourning, religious penance, and spiritual purity that seem inappropriate for celebrations focused on fertility, earthly prosperity, and the establishment of new households. You witness the elaborate process of creating medieval wedding gowns, projects that can consume months of preparation and involve entire extended families and collaborative efforts. Women spin thread during long winter evenings, weave cloth on household looms, and embroider intricate patterns that tell stories about family history, regional identity, and personal hopes for the future. These garments represent collective investments that extend far beyond individual brides to encompass entire kinship networks. The colours chosen for medieval wedding dresses carry symbolic meanings that you find both fascinating and completely alien to modern sensibilities. Red gowns symbolise passion, fertility, and the life force that brides bring to their marriages, while blue represents fidelity, stability, and the Virgin Mary's protective influence. Golden yellow suggests prosperity and divine blessing, while deep green connects brides to natural fertility cycles and the renewal of spring. These colour choices reflect medieval worldviews that see clothing as magical communication rather than mere decoration. Medieval wedding dress styles vary dramatically across social classes in ways that create visual hierarchies of status and wealth visible from considerable distances. Noble brides wear gowns with elaborate trains, intricate embroidery, and precious metal threads that require servants to help them walk. Merchant-class brides choose rich fabrics in fashionable cuts that demonstrate prosperity without competing too obviously with aristocratic display. Peasant brides make their best dresses special through careful cleaning, minor alterations, and the addition of borrowed jewellery or ribbons. You discover that medieval brides often wear their finest existing gowns rather than purchasing specially made wedding dresses. Understanding that practicality must triumph over symbolic perfection when family resources are limited. These everyday dress weddings don't represent poverty or lack of care, but rather medieval priorities that value substance over appearance and long-term utility over momentary display. Brides modify their best dresses with special accessories, borrowed finery, or seasonal flowers that transform familiar garments into wedding attire. The accessories accompanying medieval wedding dresses create opportunities for displaying wealth and craftsmanship that you observe becoming as important as the gowns themselves. Brides wear elaborate headdresses, jeweled belts, decorative shoes, and layered veils that complement their dress colours while adding their own symbolic meanings. These accessories often represent the most expensive elements of wedding attire, since they can be reused for other special occasions while wedding dresses might never be worn again. Medieval brides' hairstyling follows complex traditions that you witness varying by region, social class, and marital status in ways that communicate detailed information about women's lives and prospects. Unmarried women typically wear their hair loose or in simple braids that emphasize their virginity and availability, while the transition to married status involves elaborate hair arrangements that symbolize their new domestic responsibilities and social maturity. The role of borrowed finery in medieval weddings creates networks of feminine cooperation that you find both touching and economically shrewd. Women lend each other jewelry, veils, special shoes, and decorative accessories that allow brides to achieve levels of luxury far beyond their family's permanent means. These lending arrangements strengthen social bonds between women while ensuring that important ceremonies receive appropriate visual treatment regardless of individual economic limitations. You observe how medieval wedding dress traditions blend Christian symbolism with much older pagan associations in ways that reveal the complex religious landscape of medieval life. Brides wear crosses and religious medals alongside protective amulets, fertility charms, and symbols drawn from pre-Christian traditions that their grandmothers practiced in secret. These mixed religious messages suggest that medieval people hedge their spiritual bets when facing life's most crucial transitions. The seasonal timing of medieval weddings influences bridal fashion in practical ways that you witness affecting everything from fabric choices to accessory selection. Spring brides might incorporate fresh flowers into their ensembles, while autumn brides choose heavier fabrics and warmer accessories. Winter weddings require additional layers that can obscure dress details, while summer celebrations allow for lighter fabrics and more elaborate decorative elements that won't be hidden under cloaks. Medieval bridal veils carry symbolic weight that extends far beyond modern fashion considerations into realms of spiritual protection and social communication. You watch brides choosing veils based on length, transparency, and decorative elements that will communicate specific messages about their virtue, family status, and expectations for their marriages. Some veils include family heirlooms woven into their fabric, while others feature religious symbols or protective charms. The preservation and reuse of medieval wedding dresses reveals attitudes toward clothing, memory, and family continuity that differ dramatically from modern disposable fashion culture. You observe wedding gowns being carefully stored, altered for daughters or granddaughters, or even converted into christening gowns, burial shrouds, or church vestments that extend their spiritual significance across multiple generations and life cycle transitions. Regional variations in medieval wedding dress traditions create fascinating diversity across European cultures that you discover reflects local textile industries, climate considerations, and cultural values. Italian brides favour silk and elaborate embroidery that demonstrates urban sophistication, while English brides choose wool and linen that emphasize practical durability. German wedding dress traditions incorporate folk patterns that connect brides to ancient tribal identities, while French styles emphasize courtly elegance and fashion innovation. The economic impact of medieval wedding dress preparation extends far beyond individual families into broader textile industries and craft specializations. You witness communities developing reputations for particular types of wedding attire production, creating economic networks that connect rural fibre producers with urban seamstresses, embroiderers, and jewellery makers who collaborate to create bridal ensembles that represent collective artistic achievements. Historians still argue whether medieval wedding dress traditions provided more creative expression or imposed greater conformity constraints compared to modern bridal fashion choices. Some evidence suggests that medieval brides enjoyed considerable flexibility in adapting traditional styles to personal preferences and family circumstances. Other scholars emphasize the restrictive nature of social expectations that limited individual expression in favor of community standards and symbolic communication requirements. You discover that medieval wedding dress superstitions create elaborate belief systems around color choices, fabric types, and decorative elements that brides must navigate carefully to ensure marital happiness and fertility. Certain fabric patterns are believed to promote conception, while others might bring bad luck or interfere with household harmony. These superstitious concerns often conflict with practical considerations or aesthetic preferences, creating tension between magical thinking and rational decision-making. The documentation of medieval wedding attire in contemporary art, literature, and legal records provides insights into changing fashion trends and social values that you find invaluable for understanding how medieval people expressed identity through clothing choices. Wedding dress descriptions in wills, marriage contracts, and court records reveal the enormous importance placed on appropriate bridal attire as markers of family honour and social respectability. As you observe these medieval brides preparing their wedding attire with such care and symbolic consciousness, you begin to understand how clothing serves as a complex language of social communication that extends far beyond mere decoration into realms of magic, economics, and identity formation that shape not only wedding day experiences, but also ongoing marital relationships and community standing. You wander through medieval landscapes searching for wedding ceremonies, only to discover that the question of where medieval couples actually exchanged vows reveals one of the most surprising aspects of historical marriage customs that would shock modern churchgoers who assume religious buildings have always been the natural setting for matrimonial celebrations. The reality you uncover is far more diverse and often more practical than contemporary assumptions suggest, with couples marrying in locations that prioritize legal validity, family convenience, and community witness over religious symbolism or architectural grandeur. Standing at medieval church doorways, you witness countless couples exchanging vows not inside the sacred building but literally on the threshold, in ceremonies conducted on church porches that serve as liminal spaces between secular and religious worlds. These church door weddings represent the most common form of medieval religious marriage ceremony, allowing couples to benefit from clerical oversight and divine blessing while acknowledging that the church interior remains reserved for more exclusively spiritual activities like mass baptism and funeral rites. The church porch ceremonies you observe unfold with fascinating combinations of legal formality and casual accessibility that reflect medieval attitudes toward both marriage and religious authority. Couples arrive with their families and witnesses, exchange vows under priestly supervision, receive blessings that invoke divine protection, and then often proceed directly to secular celebrations without ever entering the church building itself. These threshold ceremonies satisfy both religious requirements and practical needs, while maintaining clear distinctions between sacred and secular aspects of matrimonial union. You discover that many medieval couples marry in completely secular locations that prioritize convenience, family tradition, or legal necessity over religious considerations. Village squares, family homes, manor house great halls, and even outdoor locations like fields or crossroads serve as wedding venues when practical considerations outweigh symbolic preferences. These secular ceremonies often include religious elements like prayers or blessings, but they occur in locations chosen for accessibility, capacity, or sentimental significance rather than spiritual sanctification. The evolution of indoor church weddings represents a gradual shift in medieval religious and social customs that you witness happening unevenly across different regions, social classes, and time periods. Earlier medieval centuries see few indoor church weddings, while later periods show increasing ecclesiastical insistence on conducting marriages within consecrated buildings. This transition reflects growing church authority over matrimonial matters and changing theological understanding of marriage as a sacrament requiring proper liturgical setting. Medieval home weddings create intimate ceremonies that you find both touching and surprisingly common, especially among families who prioritize privacy, economy, or convenience over public display. These domestic celebrations often occur in family great halls, courtyards or gardens that can accommodate extended family members and close friends while maintaining the personal character that many families prefer for such important life transitions. Home weddings also allow families greater control over guest lists, catering arrangements, and ceremonial details. You observe how medieval outdoor weddings serve practical purposes that modern indoor ceremonies cannot match, particularly for large celebrations that exceed the capacity of available buildings or for families who cannot afford venue rental fees. Fields, forest clearings, and village commons provide ample space for extended celebrations while connecting marriage ceremonies to natural cycles of fertility, renewal, and seasonal change that medieval people associate with successful unions and prosperous futures. The legal requirements for medieval marriage location create interesting constraints that you witness affecting couples' venue choices in unexpected ways. Some regions require marriages to occur within specific geographical boundaries to ensure proper legal jurisdiction, while others mandate that ceremonies take place in locations where adequate witnesses can observe the proceedings. These legal considerations sometimes force couples to choose venues that might not match their personal preferences but satisfy bureaucratic necessities. Medieval royal and noble weddings often occur in locations chosen for political rather than religious reasons, and you witness ceremonies conducted in castles, palaces, and manor houses that serve diplomatic purposes while accommodating the complex logistics of elite celebrations. These aristocratic venues allow for elaborate entertainment, extensive guest lists, and ceremonial displays that demonstrate family wealth and political connections while providing settings appropriate for marriages that function as international diplomatic events. The role of pilgrimage sites in medieval wedding venues creates opportunities for couples to combine matrimonial celebrations with religious devotion in ways that you find both romantic and strategically clever. Some couples choose to marry at famous shrines, cathedral sites, or locations associated with saints known for protecting marriages and promoting fertility. These pilgrimage weddings allow couples to invoke special divine protection, while also creating memorable experiences that distinguish their marriages from ordinary local ceremonies. Medieval urban wedding venues reflect the commercial and social realities of city life in ways that you observe differing dramatically from rural celebration options. Guild halls, merchant houses, and urban churches serve couples whose lives center around trade, craftsmanship, and commercial networks rather than agricultural cycles and landed property. These urban venues often feature more sophisticated amenities and decorative possibilities, but may lack the personal connections and family traditions associated with rural celebration sites. You discover that medieval military wedding venues serve couples whose lives revolve around warfare, castle service, or frontier settlement in locations that prioritize security and accessibility over comfort or aesthetic appeal. Castle courtyards, garrison chapels, and even military camps host weddings that must accommodate the realities of medieval military life while providing appropriate settings for ceremonies that establish families within martial communities. The seasonal accessibility of medieval wedding venues creates timing constraints that you witness affecting couples' planning decisions in ways that modern indoor ceremonies rarely experience. Winter weather might make remote locations inaccessible, while spring flooding could eliminate riverside venues that seem perfect during summer months. These seasonal considerations force medieval couples to balance ideal venue characteristics against practical accessibility concerns that modern couples rarely face. Medieval travelling wedding ceremonies accommodate couples whose circumstances require mobility or whose preferred officiants live far from suitable venues. You observe travelling priests conducting ceremonies in temporary locations, couples journeying to distant venues that hold special significance, and even wedding processions that move between multiple locations during extended celebration periods. These mobile ceremonies reflect medieval society's greater comfort with temporary arrangements and flexible institutional structures. The economic aspects of medieval wedding venue selection reveal cost considerations that you find both familiar and surprisingly different from modern expenses. While couples must consider venue rental fees, decoration costs, and catering logistics much like contemporary celebrations, they also face unique medieval expenses like hiring adequate security for outdoor events, providing appropriate accommodation for travelling guests, or obtaining special permissions for using particular locations. Medieval wedding venue superstitions create belief systems around location choices that you observe influencing couples' decisions in ways that blend practical considerations with magical thinking. Certain locations are believed to promote marital happiness, fertility, or economic prosperity, while others might carry associations with failed marriages, supernatural dangers, or unfortunate omens. These superstitious concerns sometimes conflict with practical venue advantages, creating difficult choices between magical protection and logistical convenience. The documentation of medieval wedding venues and contemporary records provides insights into changing social customs and architectural development that you find valuable for understanding how medieval communities adapted built environments to serve matrimonial needs. Church records, legal documents, and chronicle accounts reveal which venues were considered most appropriate for different types of couples, while also showing how venue preferences changed over time. Historians still argue whether medieval venue diversity provided more meaningful ceremonial options or created unnecessary complexity compared to modern standardized wedding location customs. Some evidence suggests that flexible venue choices allowed couples to create more personally significant ceremonies that reflected their specific circumstances and values. Other scholars emphasize the advantages of standardized church venues that provided predictable amenities and clear ceremonial protocols. The relationship between medieval wedding venues and community participation creates social dynamics that you observe affecting both ceremonial character and ongoing neighborhood relationships. Public venues like church porches or village squares encourage community involvement in ways that strengthen social bonds, while private venues like family homes allow for more intimate celebrations that might exclude neighbours who expect inclusion in important local events. As you survey the remarkable diversity of medieval wedding venues, from humble church doorways to elaborate castle great halls, you begin to understand how location choices reflected complex negotiations between religious requirements, family traditions, economic constraints, and personal preferences that created far more varied and interesting ceremonial possibilities than modern standardized wedding venue customs typically provide. You lean in close to hear the actual words spoken during medieval wedding ceremonies, discovering that these ancient vow exchanges sound both hauntingly familiar and utterly alien to modern ears, with promises that blend timeless human commitments with medieval concerns about property, obedience, and divine judgment that contemporary couples would find shocking or incomprehensible. The cadence of Latin phrases mingles with vernacular declarations as you witness couples binding themselves with language that carries legal, spiritual, and social weight far beyond anything modern wedding vows typically attempt to achieve. The structure of medieval wedding vows follows patterns established by church authorities who understand that spoken words possess almost magical power to create new realities, transform social relationships, and invoke divine protection or punishment depending on how carefully couples observe prescribed formulas. You observe priests guiding nervous couples through vow exchanges that must be spoken in exact sequences with specific phrases, and before adequate witnesses to achieve legal validity that will withstand future challenges or disputes. Medieval grooms typically speak vows that emphasize their role as protectors, providers, and household heads in language that modern audiences might find uncomfortably patriarchal but which medieval society considers essential for establishing proper marital hierarchy. You hear promises like, "I take thee to my wedded wife, to have and to hold from this day forward, for better, for worse, for richer, for poorer, in sickness and in health, to love and to cherish, till death us do part," delivered with variations that reflect regional customs and individual circumstances. The bride's vows you witness often include explicit promises of obedience that modern women would reject, but which medieval society considers fundamental for household stability and divine approval. Phrases like, "I take thee to my wedded husband, to have and to hold from this day forward, for better, for worse, for richer, for poorer, in sickness and in health, to love, cherish, and obey, till death us do part," establish clear expectations about marital roles, while also affirming mutual commitment and affection. You discover that medieval wedding vows frequently include financial commitments that modern ceremonies typically handle through separate legal documents, with grooms promising to endow their wives with specific property or income that will provide security if marriages end through death or other circumstances. These dower promises represent legally binding contracts that create immediate financial obligations and inheritance rights that affect entire families for generations. The religious language embedded in medieval vows reflects theological understanding that marriage represents a sacred covenant requiring divine blessing and ongoing spiritual commitment. You hear couples invoking God as witness to their promises, asking for heavenly protection of their union, and acknowledging that the earthly marriage reflects eternal spiritual relationships between Christ and the Church that give matrimonial bonds cosmic significance beyond mere human agreement. Medieval vow exchanges often occur in multiple languages that reflect the linguistic diversity of medieval Europe and the international character of church authority. Latin phrases provide religious solemnity and universal recognition, while vernacular language ensures that couples and witnesses actually understand the commitments being made. You witness ceremonies where vows switch between languages mid-sentence, creating linguistic complexity that demonstrates both local identity and universal religious participation. The role of witnesses in medieval vow exchanges goes far beyond modern ceremonial participation into realms of legal responsibility and social enforcement that you find both protective and potentially oppressive. Witnesses don't just observe vows, but accept obligations to remember exact wording, testify in future legal proceedings, and help enforce marital commitments within their communities. These witness responsibilities make wedding attendance a serious civic duty rather than mere social celebration. You observe how medieval couples sometimes negotiate vow language to reflect their specific circumstances, family arrangements, or personal concerns in ways that reveal surprising flexibility within seemingly rigid ceremonial structures. Wealthy widows might insist on vows that protect their property rights, while young couples from feuding families might include promises about maintaining family peace. These customized elements demonstrate that medieval ceremonies can accommodate individual needs while maintaining essential structural elements. The timing of vow exchanges within medieval wedding ceremonies creates dramatic moments that you witness building tension and emotional intensity in ways that modern streamlined ceremonies rarely achieve. Vows often represent the climactic moment of extended celebrations, occurring after elaborate processions, preliminary blessings, and community gatherings that create anticipation and emphasize the significance of spoken commitments that transform social relationships. Medieval wedding vows sometimes include conditional clauses that modern couples would find unromantic, but which medieval society considers prudent protection against uncertain futures. Promises might specify what happens if either spouse becomes seriously ill, if political circumstances force family relocations, or if previously unknown impediments to marriage come to light. These conditional elements reflect medieval understanding that even sincere commitments might require modification due to circumstances beyond human control. The musical elements accompanying medieval vow exchanges create ceremonial atmosphere that you find both beautiful and functionally important for ensuring that spoken words achieve maximum emotional and spiritual impact. Chanted responses, sung prayers, and instrumental accompaniment transform simple spoken promises into elaborate liturgical performances that engage multiple senses while reinforcing the sacred character of matrimonial commitments. You discover that medieval couples sometimes exchange private vows in addition to public ceremonial promises, creating intimate moments that balance personal expression with social requirements. These private exchanges might occur before official ceremonies, during quiet moments within public celebrations, or even years later as couples develop deeper understanding of their relationships. The existence of both public and private vow traditions suggests that medieval people understand the difference between social performance and personal commitment. The preservation of medieval vow language in contemporary wedding ceremonies reveals the remarkable staying power of ceremonial traditions that continue to influence modern matrimonial customs centuries after their original contexts disappeared. Modern couples speak variations of medieval promises without understanding their historical origins or original meanings, demonstrating how powerful ceremonial language can transcend the social circumstances that created it. Medieval wedding vow disputes create legal challenges that you observe requiring sophisticated interpretation of spoken language, witness testimony, and ceremonial context to determine exactly what commitments couples actually made during their wedding ceremonies. Church courts develop elaborate procedures for reconstructing vow exchanges when marriages face annulment proceedings, inheritance disputes, or other legal challenges that depend on precise understanding of originally spoken promises. The emotional impact of medieval wedding vows creates moments of genuine feeling that you witness, breaking through the formal structures and social obligations that dominate most aspects of arranged marriages. Despite the ceremonial language and public performance requirements, couples sometimes achieve moments of authentic connection and mutual commitment that transform obligatory social rituals into meaningful personal experiences. Regional variations in medieval vow language reflect local legal traditions, religious customs, and linguistic development that create fascinating diversity within universal church requirements. English vows differ from French versions, while Italian and German couples speak promises that reflect their particular cultural values and legal systems. These regional differences demonstrate how universal religious institutions adapt to local circumstances while maintaining essential ceremonial functions. Historians still argue whether medieval wedding vows provided more meaningful commitment opportunities or imposed greater restrictive obligations compared to modern matrimonial promises. Some evidence suggests that elaborate vow language and witness requirements created stronger social support for marriages, while also providing clear expectations about marital roles. Other scholars emphasize the constraining effects of rigid vow formulas that limited individual expression and personal choice. The relationship between medieval vow language and contemporary legal understanding creates ongoing interpretive challenges for historians attempting to understand exactly how medieval couples understood their matrimonial commitments and what social expectations these promises created within their communities. Modern legal concepts often prove inadequate for interpreting historical documents that assume social relationships and legal frameworks that no longer exist. As you listen to these ancient vow exchanges echoing across centuries, you begin to understand how spoken promises possessed power to create new social realities and transform individual identity in ways that modern secular ceremonies rarely attempt to achieve, while also recognizing how these ceremonial commitments reflected medieval social values and religious beliefs that continue to influence contemporary marriage traditions. You watch medieval couples exchange rings with ceremonies that reveal the profound symbolic evolution of what modern people consider simple jewelry, witnessing rituals where circular bands of metal carry meanings that extend far beyond romantic sentiment into realms of legal ownership, spiritual protection, and social communication that would astonish contemporary ring wearers who see their wedding bands as purely decorative tokens of affection. The medieval wedding ring you observe being placed on trembling fingers looks nothing like modern bands, often featuring elaborate religious inscriptions in Latin, tiny carved figures of saints, or even miniature architectural elements that transform these circular ornaments into wearable prayer books designed to provide constant spiritual guidance and divine protection throughout married life. These rings serve as portable shrines that medieval couples can consult during moments of marital difficulty or spiritual crisis. Standing close to ring exchange ceremonies, you discover that medieval couples don't simply slip bands onto fingers, but participate in elaborate rituals that involve blessing the rings with holy water, touching them to religious relics, and speaking specific prayers that invoke divine protection, while also establishing legal ownership of wives by their husbands. The ring exchange represents both romantic gesture and property transfer, creating ambiguities about women's status that medieval society finds perfectly natural. The finger chosen for medieval wedding rings follows traditions that you find both familiar and surprisingly complex, with most couples placing rings on what modern people call the ring finger, while believing that a special vein connects this digit directly to the heart. However, you also observe regional variations where couples wear wedding rings on different fingers, with some traditions requiring rings to move between fingers during different parts of the ceremony to invoke various spiritual protections. Medieval ring metals carry symbolic meanings that extend far beyond mere aesthetic preferences into realms of spiritual significance and economic communication that modern couples rarely consider when selecting their bands. Gold rings symbolize incorruptible divine love and economic prosperity. Silver represents purity and lunar feminine energy, while iron bands demonstrate strength and martial virtue. The choice of metal communicates detailed messages about couples' values, expectations, and social aspirations. You witness the fascinating medieval practice of using feeder rings, bands featuring tiny carved hands clasping together, that serve as both engagement and wedding jewelry, while symbolizing the mutual commitment and partnership that marriage represents. These rings often split into two interlocking pieces that couples separate during betrothal and reunite during wedding ceremonies, creating physical representations of incomplete relationships awaiting matrimonial fulfillment. The religious inscriptions inside medieval wedding rings create miniature prayer texts that couples can read privately throughout their marriages, with popular phrases including "Isus autem transiens per medium elorum ibat," Jesus passing through their midst went away. Deus quid retribuam, God, what shall I repay? And other scriptural quotations believed to provide spiritual protection against marital discord, adultery, and diabolic temptation. Medieval Gimel rings represent engineering marvels that you find both mechanically impressive and symbolically sophisticated, featuring multiple interlocking bands that separate during betrothal, with each partner wearing individual sections, then reunite during wedding ceremonies to create single complex rings that demonstrate the transformation of separate individuals into unified married couples through mechanical as well as spiritual means. The economic implications of medieval wedding rings reflect family wealth and social status in ways that create visible hierarchies of matrimonial value that entire communities can read and interpret. Elaborate rings with precious stones, intricate metalwork, and expensive materials demonstrate family prosperity and the high regard in which particular marriages are held, while simple bands indicate more modest circumstances without suggesting any lesser commitment or divine blessing. You observe how medieval couples sometimes inherit wedding rings from previous generations, creating family traditions that connect contemporary marriages to ancestral relationships while also providing economic advantages for families that cannot afford new jewellery. These inherited rings carry spiritual power accumulated through previous successful marriages, while also demonstrating family continuity and the enduring nature of matrimonial institutions across generations. The blessing ceremonies for medieval wedding rings involve elaborate priestly rituals that transform simple metal bands into sacred objects believed to possess supernatural powers for protecting marriages, promoting fertility, and preventing adultery. You watch priests sprinkling rings with holy water, touching them to religious relics, and reciting extended prayers that invoke divine protection while warning about the spiritual dangers that threaten all marriages. Medieval ring superstitions create complex belief systems around proper handling, wearing and care of wedding bands that couples must navigate carefully to ensure marital happiness and avoid supernatural misfortune. Dropping rings during ceremonies portends future marital discord, while rings that become stuck on fingers during exchange rituals suggest that marriages will prove difficult to dissolve even if circumstances warrant separation. The role of ring bearers in medieval weddings creates opportunities for community participation that you witness serving both practical and symbolic functions, with young children, religious figures, or honoured family members carrying rings while representing innocence, spiritual authority, or family continuity. These ring bearers don't simply transport jewellery but embody hopes for the marriage's spiritual character and social integration. You discover that medieval couples sometimes commission custom wedding rings from skilled metalworkers who specialise in matrimonial jewellery, creating unique designs that incorporate family heraldry, personal symbols, or regional artistic traditions. These custom rings represent significant financial investments that demonstrate families' commitment to providing their children with appropriate matrimonial equipment while also supporting local craftsmen and artistic traditions. The preservation of medieval wedding rings through centuries of wear creates archaeological evidence that modern historians use to understand medieval marriage customs, religious beliefs, and artistic development. Ring inscriptions, metal compositions, and decorative elements provide insights into medieval values and expectations that complement written records, while also revealing aspects of married life that formal documents rarely address. Medieval ring theft represents a serious crime that reflects both the economic value and symbolic importance of wedding bands in medieval society. You observe legal cases involving stolen rings being treated with the same gravity as other forms of property theft, while also recognizing that ring theft carries additional moral implications related to attacking the sacred bonds of marriage and family stability. The seasonal timing of ring exchanges follows patterns connected to agricultural cycles, religious calendars, and astrological beliefs that medieval couples consider crucial for ensuring matrimonial success. Spring ring exchanges align with natural fertility cycles, while autumn ceremonies connect marriages to harvest abundance and winter preparation. These timing considerations demonstrate how deeply medieval marriage customs integrate with broader cosmic and natural patterns. Regional variations in medieval ring traditions create fascinating diversity across European cultures that you observe reflecting local metalworking skills, religious customs, and social values. Irish claddock rings emphasize loyalty and friendship alongside love, while Italian rings might feature elaborate religious imagery drawn from local saint traditions. German rings often incorporate folk symbols that connect couples to ancient tribal identities and cultural continuity. The economic impact of medieval wedding ring production creates specialized industries that you witness developing around major population centers, with skilled metalworkers, gem cutters, and religious artists collaborating to meet demand for matrimonial jewelry. These ring-making industries become important elements of urban economies while also preserving and developing artistic traditions that influence broader decorative arts development. Historians still argue whether medieval wedding rings provided more meaningful symbolic expression or created additional economic burdens compared to modern matrimonial jewelry customs. Some evidence suggests that elaborate ring symbolism allowed couples to express complex feelings and expectations about their relationships through visual and tactile means that enhanced emotional connection. Other scholars emphasize the economic pressures that expensive ring requirements placed on families already struggling with dowry obligations and wedding expenses. The relationship between medieval ring symbolism and contemporary wedding band traditions reveals remarkable continuity across centuries of social change, with modern couples unconsciously participating in ritual patterns and symbolic communications that originated in medieval, religious and social contexts. Contemporary ring exchanges preserve ancient meanings while also adapting to modern values and expectations about romantic love and individual choice. As you observe these medieval ring exchanges with their layers of spiritual significance, economic communication, and social symbolism, you begin to understand how simple circular objects can carry enormous cultural weight and serve as focal points for complex negotiations between individual desires, family obligations, religious requirements, and community expectations that continue to influence modern matrimonial customs. You enter the chaotic medieval kitchens, where wedding feast preparations transform ordinary domestic spaces into battlegrounds of culinary ambition. Witnessing scenes of organized pandemonium where sweating cooks orchestrate elaborate meal productions that will feed hundreds of guests while demonstrating family wealth, social status, and hospitality on a scale that would challenge modern catering companies with all their technological advantages and supply chain efficiency. The sheer logistical complexity of medieval wedding feast preparation astounds you as you observe households mobilizing resources weeks or even months in advance, with families borrowing cooking equipment from neighbors, hiring additional servants, and negotiating with local suppliers for quantities of food that temporarily transform private homes into commercial-scale food production facilities operating without refrigeration, gas stoves, or any modern conveniences that contemporary caterers consider essential. Medieval wedding menus you witness being planned reflect intricate calculations that balance family budget constraints against social expectations, with hosts understanding that their reputations will be judged not only by food quality and quantity, but also by the variety, exotic nature, and symbolic appropriateness of dishes served to guests whose memories of wedding feasts often outlast memories of the actual ceremonies themselves. Standing in smoky kitchen spaces lit only by fire and candles, you watch medieval cooks working with ingredients that must be preserved, prepared, and cooked using techniques that require enormous skill and timing coordination to produce edible results. Salt-preserved meats must be soaked, spiced, and roasted over open fires that require constant attention to prevent burning, while elaborate pastries demand precise timing and temperature control achieved through experience rather than thermometers or timers. The meat courses dominating medieval wedding feasts create spectacular displays that you find both impressive and slightly disturbing, with entire roasted animals presented as centerpieces designed to demonstrate abundance and hunting prowess. Whole pigs, sheep, and even deer appear on medieval wedding tables, often elaborately decorated with herbs, fruits, and artistic arrangements that transform necessary protein sources into theatrical presentations, celebrating natural abundance and human dominion over the animal kingdom. You discover that medieval wedding cakes bear no resemblance to modern tiered confections, instead consisting of elaborate meat pies, fruit tarts, or bread-based constructions that serve practical nutritional purposes, while also providing opportunities for artistic decoration and symbolic communication. These medieval cakes might contain whole birds, fish, or even live animals that emerge dramatically when the pastry is cut, creating entertainment as well as sustenance. The beverage preparations for medieval weddings reveal sophisticated understanding of fermentation, flavouring, and presentation that you observe requiring specialised knowledge and equipment to produce ales, wines, and mead in quantities sufficient for extended celebrations. Families often begin brewing wedding beverages months in advance, understanding that proper fermentation takes time and that running out of alcohol during wedding celebrations represents social disaster that could damage family reputations for years. Medieval wedding feast timing follows patterns that stretch celebrations across multiple days, creating logistical challenges that you witness requiring careful coordination of food preparation, service, and storage to ensure that guests receive adequate meals throughout extended festivities. Cooks must plan menus that can be prepared in stages, with some dishes requiring immediate service while others can be prepared in advance and reheated or served at room temperature. The social hierarchy reflected in medieval wedding feast service creates elaborate protocols that you observe requiring careful attention to seating arrangements, serving order, and portion distribution based on guests' social status, relationship to the families, and traditional precedence rules. High-status guests receive choice cuts of meat, elaborate dishes, and priority service, while lower-status attendees might receive simpler fare that nonetheless demonstrates appropriate hospitality. You witness the remarkable creativity that medieval cooks bring to wedding feast preparation, developing elaborate presentations that transform simple ingredients into spectacular displays through artistic arrangement, decorative garnishing, and theatrical service techniques. Dishes might be coloured with exotic spices, shaped into architectural forms, or presented with dramatic flourishes that create memorable experiences for guests while demonstrating the family's sophistication and resources. The preservation challenges facing medieval wedding feast preparation require sophisticated planning that you find both ingenious and precarious, with cooks using salt, smoke, spices, and cool storage to keep large quantities of food fresh without refrigeration. These preservation techniques demand precise timing and constant vigilance to prevent spoilage that could ruin entire celebrations and waste substantial family resources invested in wedding preparations. Medieval wedding feast recipes often remain family secrets passed down through generations of women who specialize in celebration cooking, creating culinary traditions that you observe connecting contemporary weddings to ancestral practices, while also demonstrating the accumulated wisdom that medieval households developed to manage complex domestic challenges. These recipe traditions represent valuable intellectual property that families guard carefully while also sharing selectively to maintain social relationships. The economic impact of medieval wedding feast preparation creates temporary boom periods for local food suppliers. Craftsmen and service providers who benefit from the concentrated spending that wedding celebrations generate. Butchers, bakers, brewers, and farmers experience increased demand that can significantly boost their annual incomes, while also creating opportunities for seasonal employment for additional cooks, servers, and entertainment providers. You discover that medieval wedding feasts often include symbolic foods believed to promote fertility, prosperity, and marital happiness, with couples eating specific dishes that carry magical properties designed to ensure successful marriages and abundant offspring. These symbolic foods might include eggs, nuts, fruits, and honey-based confections that connect wedding celebrations to ancient fertility rituals, while also providing nutritious treats that guests genuinely enjoy. The waste management challenges created by medieval wedding feasts require planning that you observe involving careful coordination of leftovers distribution, animal feed preparation, and disposal procedures for food scraps that cannot be preserved or consumed. Successful wedding hosts often distribute remaining food to poor community members, creating charitable opportunities that enhance family reputations while also preventing waste of valuable resources. Medieval wedding feast entertainment during meals creates integrated experiences that you witness, combining food service with musical performance, theatrical presentations, and social interaction that transform eating into comprehensive cultural experiences. Minstrels, jesters, and storytellers perform between courses, while elaborate dish presentations create their own entertainment value that keeps guests engaged throughout extended meal periods. The seasonal timing of medieval wedding feasts affects menu planning in ways that you observe, creating both opportunities and constraints based on ingredient availability, preservation capabilities, and weather conditions that influence cooking methods and service arrangements. Spring weddings might feature early vegetables and fresh dairy products, while autumn celebrations can include harvest abundance and preserved meats that provide different culinary possibilities. Regional variations in medieval wedding feast traditions create fascinating diversity across European cultures that you discover, reflecting local agricultural products, cooking techniques, and cultural values. Mediterranean wedding feasts emphasize olive oil, wine, and seafood, while Northern European celebrations feature dairy products, preserved meats, and grain-based dishes that demonstrate adaptation to different climates and resource availability. The religious elements incorporated into medieval wedding feast preparation include blessing, ceremonies for food, prayers before meals, and symbolic dishes that connect earthly celebration to spiritual significance. You observe priests blessing wedding feast ingredients, couples sharing consecrated bread, and religious imagery incorporated into food presentations that reinforce the sacred aspects of matrimonial celebration. Historians still argue whether medieval wedding feasts provided more meaningful community celebration or created unnecessary economic pressure compared to modern wedding reception customs. Some evidence suggests that elaborate feast preparations strengthened social bonds and provided opportunities for community participation that enhanced marital success. Other scholars emphasize the financial burdens that feast expectations placed on families already struggling with other wedding expenses. The documentation of medieval wedding feasts in contemporary records provides insights into medieval diet, social customs, and economic conditions that you find valuable for understanding how celebration food reflected broader patterns of consumption, hospitality, and community relationship. Detailed feast descriptions reveal not only what medieval people ate, but also how they understood the relationship between food, social status, and important life transitions. As you witness these elaborate medieval wedding feast preparations with their combination of culinary ambition, social theatre, and logistical complexity, you begin to understand how food service represents far more than mere hospitality, functioning as sophisticated communication about family values, social relationships, and cultural identity that continues to influence modern wedding reception traditions in ways that contemporary couples rarely recognise or appreciate. You step into the vibrant world of medieval wedding entertainment, where the line between celebration and chaos dissolves completely. Witnessing spectacles that transform matrimonial ceremonies into theatrical extravaganzas featuring everything from trained dancing bears to acrobatic monks performing religious allegories while juggling flaming torches, creating sensory overload that would make modern wedding DJs seem positively restrained by comparison. The minstrels you observe performing at medieval weddings represent far more than simple musicians, functioning as travelling libraries of cultural knowledge who carry epic poems, historical chronicles, and romantic tales across vast distances, while also serving as unofficial news broadcasters, political commentators, and social critics whose performances can make or break family reputations depending on how cleverly they navigate the treacherous waters of medieval court politics. Medieval wedding jesters create entertainment that you find both hilarious and surprisingly dangerous. Performing comedy routines that mock authority figures, satirize social customs, and make jokes about intimate marital topics that would scandalize modern audiences, while also providing acceptable outlets for social criticism and political dissent that might otherwise result in imprisonment or execution. These professional fools possess remarkable freedom to speak truth through humour while walking constantly on the razor's edge between entertainment and treason. The elaborate pageants staged during medieval wedding celebrations transform private ceremonies into public theatre, featuring costumed performers representing biblical figures, mythological characters, and historical heroes who enact dramatic scenes that celebrate marriage, fertility, and divine blessing while also demonstrating the host family's wealth, cultural sophistication, and ability to organise complex artistic productions that rival royal court entertainments. You witness medieval wedding dancers performing intricate choreographed routines that serve both entertainment and ritual functions, with circle dances that symbolically bind wedding guests into unified communities, partner dances that model appropriate marital relationships, and solo performances that showcase individual skill while also invoking ancient fertility magic through movement patterns that connect human celebration to natural cycles of reproduction and renewal. The musical instruments accompanying medieval wedding entertainment create soundscapes that you find both familiar and utterly alien, with combinations of drums, pipes, stringed instruments, and early brass that produce musical textures unlike anything in modern orchestral traditions. These instrumental ensembles often include exotic instruments imported from distant lands, demonstrating the international character of medieval culture, while also creating mysterious sounds that enhance the magical atmosphere surrounding matrimonial celebrations. Medieval wedding poetry recitations transform ordinary speech into elevated artistic expression that you observe serving multiple functions simultaneously, praising the couple's virtues, celebrating family lineages, invoking divine blessings, and sometimes delivering subtle political messages or social commentary disguised as matrimonial celebration. These poetic performances require enormous skill and cultural knowledge, with performers memorizing hundreds of verses while also improvising new material tailored to specific celebrations. The storytelling traditions at medieval weddings create immersive narrative experiences that you witness transporting entire wedding parties into imaginary worlds of adventure, romance, and heroic achievement. Master storytellers weave tales that might continue across multiple days, creating serial entertainment that keeps guests engaged throughout extended celebrations, while also modelling ideal relationships, demonstrating cultural values, and providing moral instruction disguised as entertainment. You discover that medieval wedding entertainment often includes elaborate contests and competitions that transform guests from passive observers into active participants. with archery contests, wrestling matches, horse races, and intellectual challenges that create opportunities for guests to demonstrate their skills while also generating excitement, gambling opportunities, and social interaction that strengthens community bonds formed during wedding celebrations. The role of professional entertainers at medieval weddings creates economic opportunities that you observe supporting entire industries of travelling performers who specialise in matrimonial celebrations. These entertainment professionals develop repertoires specifically designed for wedding contexts, maintain equipment suitable for various venues, and build reputations that determine their earning potential, while also preserving cultural traditions that might otherwise disappear. Medieval wedding entertainment often includes religious dramatic presentations that you find both spiritually meaningful and surprisingly sophisticated, with performances depicting biblical stories, saints' lives, and moral allegories that reinforce Christian teachings while also providing acceptable forms of theatrical entertainment that church authorities approve. These religious dramas serve educational purposes while also creating memorable experiences that connect matrimonial celebration to eternal spiritual truths. The interactive nature of medieval wedding entertainment creates participatory experiences that you witness breaking down barriers between performers and audiences, with guests joining in songs, participating in dances, contributing to storytelling sessions, and sometimes even becoming impromptu performers themselves. This participatory tradition creates more inclusive celebrations where entertainment emerges from community interaction rather than professional performance alone. You observe how medieval wedding entertainment reflects seasonal themes and agricultural cycles, with spring weddings featuring fertility rituals and planting songs, summer celebrations including harvest dances and abundance ceremonies, autumn weddings incorporating Thanksgiving traditions and preparation themes, while winter celebrations emphasize firelight, indoor intimacy, and storytelling traditions that help communities survive dark months through shared cultural experiences. The symbolic content embedded in medieval wedding entertainment communicates complex messages about marriage, society, and human relationships through artistic metaphor and ritual performance. You witness entertainers using allegory, symbolism, and coded language to address sensitive topics like sexual relationships, power dynamics, and social criticism while maintaining appropriate decorum and avoiding direct confrontation with authority figures who might take offence at overly explicit commentary. Medieval wedding entertainment crosses class boundaries in ways that you find both democratic and carefully controlled, with noble celebrations featuring professional entertainers, while peasant weddings rely more heavily on community participation and amateur performance. However, entertainment traditions often flow between social classes, with popular songs, dances, and stories spreading throughout medieval society regardless of their social origins. The technological aspects of medieval wedding entertainment reveal sophisticated understanding of acoustics, lighting, and staging that you discover enabling performers to create impressive effects using only natural materials and human skill. Fire effects, mechanical contraptions, and architectural elements transform wedding venues into temporary theatres capable of supporting elaborate productions that rival modern technical achievements through ingenuity rather than advanced technology. The preservation of medieval wedding entertainment traditions creates cultural continuity that you observe connecting contemporary celebrations to ancient customs, with modern wedding traditions like dancing, music, and toasting preserving elements of medieval entertainment while adapting to changed social circumstances and technological possibilities. Many seemingly modern wedding customs actually represent evolved versions of medieval entertainment traditions that have survived centuries of social change. The regional variations in medieval wedding entertainment reflect local cultural traditions, available resources, and artistic specializations that you witness creating remarkable diversity across European celebrations. Italian weddings might feature elaborate musical performances reflecting urban sophistication, while Irish celebrations emphasize storytelling and dance traditions that preserve ancient Celtic culture. These regional differences demonstrate how universal human needs for celebration adapt to specific cultural contexts. The economic impact of medieval wedding entertainment extends beyond individual celebrations into broader cultural economy, with wedding entertainment demands supporting artistic education, instrument making, costume production, and other specialized industries that contribute to overall cultural development while also preserving traditional skills and knowledge that serve broader social functions beyond matrimonial celebration alone. Historians still argue whether medieval wedding entertainment provided more meaningful cultural experience or created unnecessary extravagance compared to modern celebration customs. Some evidence suggests that elaborate entertainment traditions strengthened community bonds, preserved cultural knowledge, and provided opportunities for artistic expression that enhance social cohesion. Other scholars emphasize the economic pressures that entertainment expectations placed on families, while also noting the potential for entertainment to become more important than the marriages being celebrated. The relationship between medieval wedding entertainment and religious authority creates ongoing tensions that you observe reflecting broader conflicts between secular culture and ecclesiastical control, with church authorities sometimes supporting entertainment that reinforces Christian values while condemning performances that seem to promote pagan customs, sexual impropriety, or social disorder that threatens established authority structures. As you witness these spectacular medieval wedding entertainments, with their combination of artistic sophistication, community participation, and cultural preservation, you begin to understand how celebration becomes a vehicle for transmitting cultural knowledge, strengthening social bonds, and creating memorable experiences that transform individual marriages into community events that continue to influence participants long after the immediate festivities conclude. You find yourself drawn into the most shocking aspect of medieval weddings that would horrify contemporary couples, the bedding ceremony that transforms the most intimate moment of marriage into a raucous public spectacle where entire wedding parties escort newlyweds to their marital bed while offering crude advice, bawdy jokes, and drunken commentary that turns what modern people consider private consummation into community theatre of the most invasive kind imaginable. The procession toward the bedding ceremony begins immediately after wedding festivities conclude, and you witness guests forming elaborate parades that accompany nervous couples through corridors, up staircases, and into bedchambers while singing traditional songs that range from sweet romantic ballads to explicitly sexual ditties that would make modern audiences blush with embarrassment. These processions often include musical accompaniment, with drums and pipes providing rhythmic accompaniment to the crowd's increasingly ribald commentary. Standing in medieval bedchambers, you observe the shocking extent to which wedding guests intrude upon couples' privacy, with family members, friends, and even casual acquaintances crowding into sleeping quarters to witness the newlyweds being undressed, blessed, and literally tucked into bed while receiving advice about sexual performance, reproductive expectations, and marital duties that modern couples would never tolerate from their most intimate friends. The undressing rituals you witness involve elaborate ceremonies where designated attendants remove the couple's clothing piece by piece while guests offer commentary, suggestions, and encouragement that transform what should be intimate moments into public performances. Brides might be undressed by female relatives who examine their bodies for signs of virginity or fertility, while offering motherly advice about enduring their upcoming sexual initiation, while grooms receive masculine encouragement about their impending performance. Medieval bedding ceremonies include blessing rituals that you find both touching and intrusive, with priests or religious figures sprinkling holy water on marriage beds, reciting prayers for fertility and marital harmony, and sometimes even examining bedding arrangements to ensure they meet church requirements for proper conjugal conduct. These religious elements attempt to sanctify what might otherwise appear to be purely secular sexual entertainment. The symbolic elements embedded in medieval bedding ceremonies create layers of meaning that extend far beyond mere sexual initiation into realms of property transfer, family alliance, and community witness. You observe rituals involving the sharing of specially prepared drinks, the exchange of night clothes, and the ceremonial closing of bed curtains that represent the final stages of transforming two individuals into a legally and spiritually unified married couple. You discover that medieval bedding ceremonies serve important legal functions by providing public witness to marriage consummation, which medieval law considers essential for creating valid matrimonial bonds. Without proper consummation witnessed by reliable community members, marriages might later be challenged, annulled, or disputed in ways that could affect inheritance rights, property transfers, and family alliances that extend far beyond the immediate couple. The gender dynamics of medieval bedding ceremonies reveal complex attitudes towards sexuality, marriage, and social power that you observe reflecting broader medieval beliefs about male dominance, female submission, and the proper ordering of marital relationships. Male guests often focus their attention on encouraging grooms to assert their matrimonial authority, while female attendants concentrate on preparing brides for their new roles as obedient wives and potential mothers. Medieval bedding ceremony traditions vary significantly across social classes in ways that create different levels of privacy and intrusion based on family wealth, social status, and cultural background. Noble weddings might feature elaborate bedding ceremonies lasting hours with dozens of participants, while peasant celebrations might involve simpler rituals with fewer guests but no less community involvement in what modern people would consider intensely private moments. The alcohol consumption that typically accompanies medieval bedding ceremonies creates atmospheres of disinhibition that you witness, leading to increasingly outrageous behaviour from wedding guests who might normally observe more restrained social boundaries. Drunken relatives offer explicit sexual advice, share embarrassing personal stories, and sometimes engage in behaviour that crosses lines of propriety even by medieval standards. You observe how medieval couples navigate the psychological challenges of public bedding ceremonies, with some embracing the community support and celebratory atmosphere, while others clearly suffer from embarrassment, anxiety, or genuine fear about their sexual initiation being observed by crowds of often intoxicated relatives and friends. The emotional toll of these ceremonies on shy or modest individuals must have been considerable. The timing of medieval bedding ceremonies follows traditional patterns that you discover connecting sexual consummation to cosmic cycles, seasonal changes, and astrological beliefs about optimal conditions for conception and marital success. Some ceremonies wait for specific lunar phases, while others coordinate with religious calendar events or seasonal festivals that are believed to enhance fertility and marital happiness. Medieval bedding ceremony superstitions create elaborate belief systems around proper procedures, ritual objects, and ceremonial requirements that couples must observe to ensure marital success and avoid supernatural misfortune. These superstitions might involve specific types of bedding, particular prayers or incantations, or ritual actions that wedding parties must perform to invoke divine protection and promote conjugal harmony. The regional variations in medieval bedding ceremony traditions reflect local customs, religious practices, and cultural values that you witness, creating fascinating diversity across European celebrations. French bedding ceremonies might emphasize courtly romance and refined behavior, while German traditions could focus on fertility rituals and ancestral customs. These regional differences demonstrate how universal human needs for ritual and community participation adapt to specific cultural contexts. you discover that some medieval couples attempt to avoid or minimize bedding ceremony intrusions through careful planning, strategic timing, or negotiated compromises with their families that balance community expectations against personal privacy preferences. These efforts reveal that medieval people, despite stereotypes about communal living, do value intimate privacy and sometimes resist social customs that seem too invasive even by medieval standards. The economic aspects of medieval bedding ceremonies include costs associated with providing adequate guest accommodations, special bedding materials, ceremonial drinks, and entertainment that extend celebrations well into wedding nights. These expenses represent additional financial burdens on families already stretched by other wedding costs. Though the ceremonial importance of proper bedding rituals makes these expenditures seem necessary for ensuring matrimonial success, medieval church attitudes toward bedding ceremonies create tensions between religious requirements for proper marriage consummation and ecclesiastical discomfort with potentially lewd public behaviour that accompanies these rituals. Church authorities develop elaborate guidelines attempting to maintain ceremonial propriety while ensuring that marriages achieve the physical consummation that canon law requires for validity. The documentation of medieval bedding ceremonies in contemporary records provides historians with insights into medieval sexuality, social customs, and family relationships that formal legal documents rarely address. These records reveal attitudes toward privacy, gender roles, and community involvement in intimate relationships that help modern scholars understand how medieval people balanced individual desires against social expectations. The psychological impact of medieval bedding ceremonies on newlywed couples creates long-term effects that you observe influencing their subsequent marital relationships, with some couples bonding over shared embarrassment while others might harbour resentment about privacy violations that occurred during their wedding nights. The community memory of bedding ceremony details could affect couples' reputations and social relationships for years afterward. Historians still argue whether medieval bedding ceremonies provided valuable community support for new marriages or represented harmful intrusions into private relationships. Some evidence suggests that public witness to consummation provided legal protection and social acknowledgement that strengthened matrimonial bonds. Other scholars emphasize the traumatic potential of forced public intimacy that could damage couples' emotional and sexual relationships from their very beginning. The relationship between medieval bedding ceremonies and modern wedding traditions reveals how contemporary couples unconsciously preserve elements of these ancient rituals through practices like reception dancing, honeymoon traditions, and morning-after gatherings that maintain community involvement in marital transitions while respecting modern privacy expectations that medieval people would have found strange and potentially dangerous. As you witness these medieval bedding ceremonies with their combination of legal necessity, community celebration, and intimate intrusion, you begin to understand how medieval society treated marriage as fundamentally communal rather than individual experience, creating social support systems and legal protections through public participation that modern couples achieve through different mechanisms that prioritize personal privacy over community witness. You witness the stark social chasms that divide medieval wedding celebrations into completely different worlds of experience. Observing how a peasant's marriage ceremony bears about as much resemblance to noble nuptials as a wooden cart resembles a golden carriage. With differences so profound that couples from different classes might as well be participating in entirely separate cultural traditions that happen to share only the basic concept of matrimonial union. The economic gulf separating noble and peasant weddings creates disparities that you find both expected and shocking in their extremity, with aristocratic celebrations consuming resources that could feed entire villages for months, while poor couples struggle to afford even the most basic ceremonial requirements like adequate clothing, minimal feasting, or simple rings that demonstrate their commitment to community members who understand the sacrifice these modest expenses represent. Standing in peasant cottages, you observe wedding preparations that prioritize necessity over luxury, with families pooling resources to create celebrations that emphasize community participation over material display. These humble weddings feature homemade clothing carefully preserved and altered across generations, simple foods that represent genuine treats for families accustomed to subsistence diets, an entertainment that emerges from community talent rather than professional performance. The venue differences between social classes create entirely different ceremonial atmospheres that you witness, reflecting not just economic capacity, but fundamentally different understandings of what weddings should accomplish and how communities should participate in matrimonial celebrations. Peasant weddings occur in village squares, family homes, or outdoor locations that encourage broad community participation, while noble ceremonies unfold in private chapels, great halls, or castle courtyards that emphasize exclusivity and social hierarchy. You discover that peasant wedding ceremonies often demonstrate more genuine emotional warmth and community solidarity than their aristocratic counterparts, with guests who know each other intimately, share real affection for the couple, and participate in celebrations that strengthen existing social bonds rather than creating new political alliances. These humble weddings might lack material splendor, but they possess authenticity that elaborate noble celebrations sometimes seem to sacrifice for political necessity. The duration of wedding celebrations varies dramatically across social classes in ways that you observe reflecting both economic resources and social obligations, with noble weddings extending across days or even weeks of festivities that accommodate complex guest lists and political requirements. While peasant celebrations might last only single days or evenings that fit within agricultural work schedules and limited family budgets that cannot sustain extended entertainment. Medieval merchant-class weddings create middle ground between aristocratic extravagance and peasant simplicity that you find fascinating for their combination of commercial ambition and social aspiration. These urban celebrations feature displays of wealth earned through trade and craftsmanship, with exotic foods, imported fabrics, and entertainment that demonstrates prosperity, while also reflecting the practical values and work ethic that created merchant family success. The guest lists for different social classes reveal the distinct social networks that medieval people inhabit, with noble weddings including political allies, feudal vassals, and international connections that extend across vast geographical areas, while peasant celebrations involve local community members, extended family networks, and neighbours whose daily lives intersect regularly through shared agricultural work and village obligations. You observe how clothing differences between social classes at medieval weddings create visual hierarchies that everyone present can immediately read and interpret, with noble brides wearing silk gowns decorated with precious metals and gems that cost more than peasant families earn in lifetimes, while humble brides modify their best everyday dresses with borrowed accessories and seasonal flowers that create beauty through creativity rather than expenditure. The food served at different social class weddings reflects not only economic capacity, but also access to ingredients, cooking facilities, and culinary knowledge that you witness, creating entirely different dietary experiences. Noble wedding feasts feature exotic spices, imported delicacies, elaborate preparations requiring skilled professional cooks, and multi-course meals that demonstrate international connections and refined tastes, while peasant celebrations offer hearty local foods prepared by community members using traditional recipes passed down through generations. Medieval noble wedding entertainment showcases professional performers who travel internationally, possess specialized skills, and command substantial fees for their services, creating theatrical experiences that you observe rivaling modern professional productions in their complexity and artistic achievement. These entertainments often include elaborate costumes, complex musical arrangements, and sophisticated dramatic presentations that demonstrate cultural sophistication while also serving political functions through carefully crafted messages about power, legitimacy, and social order. The religious aspects of medieval weddings vary across social classes in ways that you find both predictable and surprising, with noble ceremonies featuring elaborate liturgical music, specially commissioned religious artworks, and high-ranking church officials who provide prestigious spiritual authority, while peasant weddings might receive simpler blessings from local priests who nonetheless provide the same essential sacramental validity that makes all marriages equally sacred in church doctrine. You discover that medieval wedding gift expectations create different economic pressures across social classes, with noble guests expected to provide valuable presents that might include land grants, precious objects, or substantial monetary contributions that reflect their own wealth and political relationships, while peasant wedding gifts focus more on practical items, shared labour, or modest contributions that demonstrate community support within realistic economic constraints. The documentation differences between social class weddings create historical preservation patterns that you observe, resulting in much more detailed records of noble celebrations, while peasant weddings often leave minimal traces in historical sources. This documentation bias affects modern understanding of medieval marriage customs, since surviving records emphasize aristocratic practices while providing limited information about how ordinary people actually celebrated their marriages. Medieval wedding travel requirements vary dramatically across social classes, with noble celebrations often requiring extensive journeys by guests who travel from distant locations with large retinues, elaborate luggage, and complex logistical support, while peasant weddings typically involve local participants who walk to nearby venues without the transportation challenges or accommodation needs that complicate aristocratic celebrations. The legal complexity surrounding different social class weddings reflects the varying property interests, inheritance rights, and political implications that matrimonial unions create for families at different economic levels. You witness noble weddings involving detailed contracts, legal documentation, and formal procedures that address complex property transfers and political alliances, while peasant marriages might require simpler legal formalities that nonetheless carry equal validity under both church and secular law. The seasonal timing preferences for weddings across different social classes reflect both economic considerations and social traditions, with noble families often choosing times that accommodate political calendars, court schedules, and international travel requirements, while peasant couples typically marry during agricultural lulls that allow community members to participate without interfering with essential farm work that determines survival for entire villages. You observe how medieval wedding traditions flow between social classes in complex patterns that demonstrate cultural exchange alongside social stratification, with peasant customs sometimes influencing noble practices while aristocratic innovations filter down to common celebrations through servants, merchants, and other social intermediaries who observe elite customs and adapt them to their own circumstances and resources. The aftermath of medieval weddings creates different social expectations and ongoing obligations across class lines, with noble couples entering marriages that involve continued political responsibilities, public ceremonial duties, and complex family alliance management, while peasant couples focus primarily on establishing functional households, contributing to community welfare, and raising children within existing social networks that provide support and stability. The regional variations in social class wedding differences reflect local economic conditions, cultural traditions, and political structures that you discover, creating fascinating diversity even within similar class levels. Italian merchant weddings differ significantly from German merchant celebrations, while English noble ceremonies follow different patterns from French aristocratic traditions. demonstrating how local cultures adapt universal social class distinctions to specific historical and geographical contexts. The role of debt and financial planning in medieval weddings varies across social classes in ways that reveal different economic strategies and risk tolerance levels, with noble families sometimes borrowing substantial sums to finance appropriate celebrations that maintained social status and political relationships, while peasant families typically limit expenses to avoid financial obligations that could threaten their basic survival and economic security. The long-term social consequences of different class wedding styles create ongoing status markers that you observe affecting couples' reputations and social relationships throughout their marriages, with memories of wedding celebrations continuing to influence how communities perceive and treat couples years after their ceremonies conclude. These lasting impressions demonstrate how wedding choices represent investments in social capital that affect entire families for generations. Historians still argue whether medieval social class differences in wedding celebrations reflected natural economic constraints or represented unnecessarily rigid social hierarchies that prevented cultural exchange and social mobility. Some evidence suggests that class-based wedding traditions provided appropriate celebrations suited to different economic circumstances and social roles. Other scholars emphasize how these differences reinforced social stratification and prevented the cultural mixing that might have encouraged greater social equality and economic opportunity. The relationship between medieval class-based wedding traditions and modern celebration customs reveals both continuity and change in how societies use matrimonial ceremonies to express and reinforce social hierarchies, while also accommodating individual preferences and economic capabilities. Many contemporary wedding traditions preserve elements of medieval class distinctions while adapting to modern democratic ideals and economic mobility that medieval people would have found revolutionary. As you witness these dramatic differences between noble and peasant medieval weddings, you begin to understand how matrimonial celebrations serve as microcosms of broader social structures, revealing through ritual and ceremony the fundamental inequalities, shared values, and cultural tensions that define medieval society, while also demonstrating the universal human need for community recognition and support during life's most important transitions. You step into the fascinating world of medieval wedding timing, where the choice of marriage season could literally determine whether couples lived happily ever after or faced supernatural disaster. Witnessing how medieval people navigate elaborate calendars of lucky and unlucky months with the same intensity that modern couples debate venue availability. Understanding that seasonal wedding choices carry consequences extending far beyond mere weather convenience into realms of fertility, prosperity, and divine favour. The agricultural cycles that dominate medieval life create seasonal wedding patterns that you observe reflecting practical necessity as much as superstitious belief. With most couples avoiding planting and harvest seasons, then their communities cannot spare time for extended celebrations, or when essential workers must remain in fields rather than attending matrimonial festivities that require broad community participation to achieve proper social recognition and religious validity. Standing in medieval village squares during different seasons, you witness how weather conditions dramatically affect wedding celebrations in ways that modern indoor ceremonies rarely experience. With spring weddings blessed by moderate temperatures and blooming flowers but threatened by unpredictable storms, while autumn ceremonies offer harvest abundance but risk early freezes that could trap travelling guests or make outdoor celebrations impossible. The church calendar creates additional layers of seasonal complexity that you discover, forcing medieval couples to navigate between secular convenience and religious prohibition, with certain months deemed inappropriate for marriage due to penitential seasons, major religious festivals, or liturgical periods when church authorities discourage worldly celebrations that might interfere with spiritual observance or compete with more important religious ceremonies. You observe how May marriages carry particularly sinister reputations in medieval society, with folk wisdom declaring marry in May, rue the day, reflecting ancient beliefs that connect this month to witchcraft, sexual impropriety, and pagan fertility rituals that Christian authorities find threatening. Couples who defy May marriage taboos often face community disapproval and family pressure to postpone their weddings to more auspicious seasons. The fertility symbolism embedded in seasonal wedding choices creates elaborate belief systems that you witness influencing couples' decisions about optimal marriage timing based on connections between natural cycles and human reproductive success. Spring weddings align with natural renewal and awakening sexuality, while autumn ceremonies connect to harvest abundance and the gathering of resources necessary for supporting families through winter months and upcoming childbearing periods. Medieval winter weddings present unique challenges and opportunities that you find both romantic and pragmatic, with shorter daylight hours and harsh weather creating intimate celebrations that emphasize hearth, home, and community solidarity during difficult seasons. These winter ceremonies often feature elaborate indoor entertainments, substantial feasting that demonstrates family resources, and extended celebrations that provide welcome relief from seasonal depression and agricultural inactivity. The astrological considerations affecting medieval wedding timing reveal sophisticated understanding of cosmic influences that couples must consider when planning their ceremonies. With families consulting learned astronomers or educated clergy to determine optimal dates based on planetary alignments, lunar phases, and zodiacal influences believed to affect marital harmony, fertility prospects, and general life success, you discover that medieval summer weddings, while offering practical advantages like pleasant weather and abundant food supplies, carry their own superstitious concerns related to excessive heat, sexual passion, and the potential for marriages to burn out as quickly as summer flowers. These seasonal associations create complex negotiations between practical convenience and magical protection that medieval couples must navigate carefully. The economic implications of seasonal wedding timing create cost variations that you observe affecting families' celebration choices in ways that balance financial constraints against social expectations and superstitious requirements. Harvest season weddings might offer abundant local food, but require premium payments for entertainment and services from professionals whose busiest seasons coincide with agricultural prosperity. Medieval spring wedding traditions connect matrimonial celebrations to ancient fertility rituals that you witness surviving despite Christian disapproval, with couples incorporating flowers, greenery, and seasonal symbols that invoke natural reproductive magic while also creating beautiful decorative elements that enhance ceremonial atmosphere. These pagan survivals demonstrate how deeply ancient beliefs influence medieval Christian culture. The travel considerations affecting seasonal wedding timing create logistical challenges that you discover varying dramatically based on weather conditions, road quality, and seasonal demands on potential guests whose attendance might determine wedding's social success. Winter travel risks and autumn harvest obligations can limit guest lists in ways that affect marriage's political and economic implications. You observe how different regions across medieval Europe develop their own seasonal wedding preferences based on local climate conditions, agricultural patterns, and cultural traditions that create fascinating geographical diversity in marriage timing customs. Mediterranean areas might favour different seasons than northern European regions, while mountainous areas face different seasonal constraints than coastal or plains communities. The preservation of seasonal wedding superstitions across generations creates family traditions that you witness influencing individual couples' choices, even when practical considerations might suggest different timing. Families might insist on maintaining ancestral seasonal preferences, despite economic inconvenience or personal preference. Understanding that violating family wedding traditions could bring supernatural misfortune to new marriages. Medieval seasonal wedding preparation requires different types of advanced planning that you find both ingenious and exhausting. With families adjusting their preparation schedules to accommodate seasonal resource availability, weather constraints, and the varying amounts of time required to organise celebrations during different times of year, when community cooperation and professional services might be more or less available. The religious seasonal restrictions create complex negotiations between church authorities and individual couples that you observe, revealing tensions between ecclesiastical control and personal choice, with some couples seeking special dispensations to marry during prohibited seasons, while others accept church timing requirements as divine guidance that will protect their marriages from spiritual dangers associated with inappropriate seasonal choices. The symbolic meanings attached to different seasonal wedding elements create elaborate interpretive systems that guests use to read couples' futures, family values, and spiritual inclinations based on their seasonal choices and associated ceremonial details. These symbolic communications function like complex languages that medieval communities understand intuitively, while modern observers might miss entirely. You discover that seasonal wedding gift traditions reflect both practical seasonal considerations and symbolic seasonal meanings, with spring weddings typically receiving gifts related to new beginnings and fertility, while autumn ceremonies might emphasize practical household items and preserved foods that help couples survive winter months. These seasonal gift patterns demonstrate how thoroughly seasonal thinking influences medieval social customs. The documentation of seasonal wedding patterns in medieval records provides historians with insights into medieval agricultural cycles, religious observances, and social customs that complement other historical sources, while also revealing how seasonal considerations affected personal life choices in ways that purely political or economic records might not capture. The health considerations affecting seasonal wedding timing create medical concerns that you observe influencing couples' choices based on medieval understanding of seasonal diseases, climatic influences on human constitution, and the optimal timing for conception and childbirth that takes into account seasonal food availability and family support systems during critical reproductive periods. The entertainment possibilities varying across seasons create different celebration opportunities that you witness, affecting wedding planning in ways that balance seasonal advantages against constraints. With summer offering outdoor possibilities but potential food spoilage concerns, while winter provides cozy indoor atmosphere but limits travel and may strain food preservation systems. Historians still argue whether medieval seasonal wedding restrictions provided beneficial guidance for family planning and celebration timing, or created unnecessary constraints that limited individual choice and created artificial hardships for couples whose personal circumstances might have benefited from different seasonal timing. Some evidence suggests that seasonal traditions helped couples avoid practical problems and align their marriages with natural cycles that enhance success prospects. The regional climate variations across medieval Europe create different seasonal wedding possibilities that you discover, leading to fascinating cultural diversity in marriage timing customs, with couples in warmer climates enjoying different seasonal options than those in colder regions, while coastal communities face different weather patterns than inland areas. The relationship between seasonal wedding timing and modern marriage customs reveals remarkable continuity in some traditions, alongside dramatic changes in others, with contemporary couples still showing seasonal preferences that reflect ancient beliefs, while also adapting to modern work schedules, venue availability, and lifestyle considerations that medieval couples never faced. As you observe these complex medieval seasonal wedding patterns with their intricate blend of practical necessity, religious requirement, and superstitious belief, you begin to understand how deeply seasonal thinking influenced every aspect of medieval life. creating calendar systems and timing traditions that connected individual life events to cosmic cycles, natural rhythms, and community patterns that gave personal choices broader meaning while also constraining individual freedom in ways that modern people might find difficult to accept or understand. You travel across medieval Europe, discovering how wedding customs transformed dramatically from region to region, witnessing celebrations that seem to belong to entirely different civilizations despite occurring within the same historical period. Observing how local traditions, climate conditions, and cultural heritage create a fascinating patchwork of matrimonial practices that would confuse and delight couples attempting to understand the bewildering diversity of medieval marriage celebrations. The stark contrast between northern and southern European wedding traditions immediately capture your attention as you observe how geography shapes ceremony in fundamental ways. With Scandinavian couples incorporating ancient Viking customs involving swords, mead halls, and elaborate gift exchanges that emphasize warrior culture and harsh climate survival, while Mediterranean celebrations feature outdoor festivities, abundant wine, and traditions that reflect urban sophistication and classical heritage. Standing in medieval English villages, you witness wedding customs that blend Anglo-Saxon traditions with Norman innovations, creating ceremonies that feature unique elements like hand-fasting rituals where couples literally bind their hands together with cords blessed by priests, creating the phrase tying the knot while also establishing legal marriages through physical symbolism that demonstrates the binding nature of matrimonial commitment in both spiritual and practical terms. French medieval weddings, you observe, showcase elaborate courtly traditions that emphasize romantic ideals, artistic refinement, and social sophistication through customs like elaborate gift-giving ceremonies, complex dancing traditions, and poetic competitions where guests compose verses celebrating the couple's virtues while demonstrating their own cultural education and literary skills that reflect the growing importance of courtly love traditions in aristocratic society. The Germanic regions present wedding customs that you find both ancient and surprisingly modern, with traditions that include elaborate processions through villages, community participation in ceremony planning, and customs like the Polterabend where guests break pottery and dishes before weddings to bring good luck while also providing opportunities for community catharsis and the symbolic destruction of the couple's single lives. You discover that Italian medieval weddings vary dramatically between northern and southern regions, with Venetian celebrations emphasizing maritime traditions and international trade connections through customs involving blessed boats and exotic spices, while southern Italian ceremonies incorporate Greek and Byzantine influences that create elaborate religious rituals and family traditions that seem almost Eastern Orthodox in their complexity and symbolic richness. Spanish wedding customs reveal the complex cultural mixing that occurs in medieval Iberia, where you witness ceremonies that blend Christian traditions with surviving Islamic customs and ancient Celtic practices, creating celebrations that might include Moorish music, elaborate architectural decorations, and gift-giving traditions that reflect the peninsula's unique position as a crossroads between European, African, and Middle Eastern cultures. The Celtic regions maintain wedding traditions that you observe connecting contemporary ceremonies to pre-Christian practices through customs like jumping over broomsticks, exchanging rings made from braided hair, and elaborate blessing ceremonies that invoke natural elements like earth, air, fire, and water, while also incorporating Christian prayers and symbols that create hybrid religious experiences. Medieval Polish wedding customs create elaborate multi-day celebrations that you find both exhausting and impressive, with traditions that include mock battles between families, elaborate negotiations over dowries conducted as public theatre, and customs like the Okiepeni ceremony, where brides symbolically transition from maidenhood to married status through ritualized hair cutting and head covering ceremonies witnessed by entire communities. You witness how medieval Russian wedding traditions incorporate Orthodox Christian elements with ancient Slavic customs, creating ceremonies that feature elaborate icon processions, complex blessing rituals involving bread and salt, and traditions like the bride price negotiations that seem almost commercial but actually serve important social functions in establishing family alliances and economic partnerships. The Hungarian medieval wedding customs you observe blend Magyar traditions with influences from neighbouring cultures, creating celebrations that emphasise horseback riding, archery contests, and elaborate feasting traditions that reflect the nomadic heritage of Hungarian ancestors, while also adapting to settled agricultural life and Christian religious requirements that shape most medieval European marriage customs. Medieval Irish wedding traditions preserve ancient Celtic customs that you find both beautiful and mystically complex, with ceremonies that might include hand-fasting rituals conducted by druids, elaborate gift exchanges involving livestock and weapons, and customs like the bride kidnapping tradition that seems violent but actually serves ritualistic purposes in demonstrating the groom's courage and the community's investment in protecting married couples. The Portuguese wedding customs reflect maritime culture and exploration traditions that you observe, creating unique ceremonies involving blessed ships, exotic spices, and traditions that emphasize the importance of travel, trade, and international connections in ways that distinguish Portuguese celebrations from other Iberian wedding customs, while also sharing many common elements with Spanish traditions. Medieval Dutch wedding traditions emphasize community cooperation and merchant values that you witness, creating celebrations focused on practical gifts. Elaborate community feasts and customs like the money dance, where guests pin coins to couples' clothing while dancing, demonstrating both community support and the practical economic foundation that successful marriages require in trading communities. You discover that medieval Czech wedding customs incorporate Central European influences with ancient Slavic traditions, creating ceremonies that feature elaborate folk costumes, complex musical traditions, and customs like the bride's veil being cut into pieces and distributed to unmarried female guests, who supposedly gain magical assistance in finding their own husbands through contact with matrimonial good fortune. The Scottish Highland wedding traditions you observe emphasise clan loyalty and warrior culture through customs like sword ceremonies where couples step over cross blades, elaborate tartan displays that demonstrate family identity, and traditions like the blackening ritual, where friends cover couples with various substances before weddings to prepare them for marriage difficulties, while also strengthening community bonds. Medieval Welsh wedding customs preserve ancient Celtic traditions that you find both romantic and practical, with ceremonies that might include elaborate harp music, poetic competitions where guests improvise verses about love and marriage, and customs like the wooden spoon carving tradition, where grooms demonstrate their devotion and practical skills by creating intricate love spoons for their brides. The regional food traditions accompanying medieval weddings create fascinating diversity that you observe reflecting local agricultural products, cooking techniques, and cultural values. With Northern European celebrations featuring hearty meat dishes and fermented beverages, while southern regions emphasize fresh vegetables, wine, and elaborate pastries that demonstrate different approaches to hospitality and celebration. Medieval wedding clothing styles vary dramatically across regions in ways that you witness, creating visual diversity that immediately identifies couples' geographical and cultural origins. With Scandinavian brides wearing elaborate silver jewellery and traditional folk costumes, while Mediterranean brides might choose silk garments and classical Roman-inspired styles that reflect different aesthetic traditions and cultural values. The seasonal timing preferences for weddings vary across regions based on climate conditions and agricultural patterns that you discover, creating different celebration calendars. With Northern European couples avoiding harsh winter months, while Mediterranean couples might prefer cooler seasons that provide relief from summer heat and align with different agricultural and social rhythms. The music and entertainment traditions accompanying regional weddings create diverse celebration atmospheres that you observe reflecting local artistic traditions, available instruments and cultural preferences, with Celtic regions emphasizing harp and flute music, while Germanic areas feature brass instruments and elaborate choral traditions that demonstrate different approaches to ceremonial entertainment. The legal traditions affecting regional wedding customs create different procedural requirements that you witness reflecting varying governmental systems, religious authorities, and customary law traditions that make marriage validity dependent on different ceremonial elements and documentation requirements that couples must navigate carefully to ensure proper legal recognition. The gift-giving traditions vary regionally in ways that you find both predictable and surprising, with pastoral communities emphasizing livestock and practical goods, while urban areas might focus on crafted items and monetary contributions that reflect different economic systems and values regarding appropriate matrimonial support and community investment in new families. Historians still argue whether medieval regional wedding diversity provided beneficial cultural richness or created unnecessary confusion and potential conflicts when couples from different regions attempted to navigate varying customs, legal requirements, and social expectations that might prove incompatible or create family tensions over appropriate ceremonial procedures and celebration styles. The preservation of regional wedding traditions across centuries demonstrates remarkable cultural continuity, alongside adaptation and change, that you observe creating modern celebration customs that still reflect medieval geographical patterns, while also adapting to contemporary circumstances and global cultural exchange that medieval people could never have anticipated. As you witness this remarkable diversity of medieval regional wedding customs, you begin to understand how geography, culture, and history combine to create the rich tapestry of matrimonial traditions that made medieval European weddings simultaneously universal in their basic human purposes and uniquely particular in their specific cultural expressions that continue to influence modern celebration customs. You stand at the threshold between medieval past and modern present, witnessing the remarkable ways that ancient wedding customs have evolved, adapted, and survived across centuries to influence contemporary matrimonial celebrations in ways that most modern couples never realize, creating an invisible bridge connecting today's brides and grooms to their medieval ancestors through traditions that carry forward the hopes, fears, and dreams that have always surrounded the mysterious transformation of two individuals into one married unit. The white wedding dress tradition that modern brides consider essential actually represents a dramatic departure from medieval customs. Yet you discover how this seemingly recent innovation connects to ancient beliefs about purity, new beginnings, and ritual transformation that medieval people expressed through different colours and symbols, while maintaining similar underlying concerns about spiritual preparation and social presentation that continue to influence contemporary bridal fashion choices. Walking down modern church aisles, you observe how the processional traditions that seem so natural to contemporary wedding guests actually preserve medieval customs involving community witness, family presentation, and ritualized movement through sacred space that transforms ordinary buildings into ceremonial theatres where private relationships become public commitments through choreographed presentations that echo ancient liturgical processions and courtly ceremonies. The exchange of wedding rings continues medieval traditions in ways that you find both obvious and surprisingly subtle, with contemporary couples unconsciously participating in symbolic communications about eternal commitment, spiritual protection, and social recognition that their medieval predecessors understood explicitly, while modern participants often treat as merely romantic gestures without recognizing their deeper ceremonial and legal significance. You discover that modern wedding vows preserve the essential structure and much of the actual language from medieval ceremonial formulas, with phrases like "for better or worse," "in sickness and health," "until death do us part," carrying forward ancient promises that address the practical realities of medieval life while also expressing timeless human commitments that transcend historical circumstances and continue to resonate with contemporary couples seeking meaningful ways to express their devotion. The tradition of wedding photography and videography represents a technological evolution of medieval concerns about witnessing, documentation, and memory preservation that you observe serving similar functions to the elaborate witness requirements and ceremonial publicity that medieval societies used to ensure legal validity and community recognition of matrimonial unions. Though modern couples focus more on personal memory than legal protection, modern reception traditions preserve medieval feast customs in adapted forms that you witness maintaining the essential social functions of community celebration, family alliance building, and hospitality demonstration while adapting to contemporary lifestyle patterns and social expectations that differ dramatically from medieval agricultural rhythms and social hierarchies, but serve similar purposes in strengthening social bonds and celebrating life transitions. The bachelor and bachelorette party traditions that contemporary couples consider essential pre-wedding celebrations actually evolved from medieval customs involving ritual separation from single life, community blessing of upcoming marriages, and ceremonial preparation for new social roles. Though modern versions emphasize entertainment and personal celebration, rather than the spiritual preparation and social instruction that characterized their medieval predecessors, you observe how modern wedding gift registries represent evolved versions of medieval dowry systems and gift-giving traditions that served practical functions in helping couples establish households while also creating social obligations and community investment in marital success. Though contemporary gift-giving emphasizes personal choice and convenience rather than the economic necessity and social alliance building that characterized medieval matrimonial exchanges, the honeymoon tradition that modern couples consider romantic innovation actually preserves medieval customs involving temporary separation from community obligations, ritualized privacy for marriage consummation, and ceremonial transition into married social status. Though contemporary honeymoons emphasize recreation and romance, rather than the practical purposes and spiritual significance that medieval people associated with post-wedding seclusion periods, modern wedding planning industries represent commercial evolution of medieval community cooperation systems that you discover serving similar functions in coordinating complex celebrations, managing family expectations, and ensuring proper ceremonial execution while adapting to contemporary economic structures and professional specialization that medieval communities achieved through kinship networks and traditional knowledge systems. The tradition of wedding anniversaries continues medieval concerns about commemorating important life events, maintaining marital commitment, and celebrating relationship milestones, while adapting ancient calendrical thinking and ritual repetition to contemporary lifestyle patterns that emphasize personal choice and romantic sentiment rather than the community witness and religious observance that characterized medieval anniversary customs. You witness how modern wedding photography poses and album traditions unconsciously preserve medieval concerns about visual representation, family honor, and ceremonial documentation while adapting to technological possibilities that medieval people achieved through artistic commissioning, heraldic display, and material culture preservation that served similar functions in creating lasting records of important family events. The contemporary emphasis on personalized wedding ceremonies reflects medieval understanding that marriages must balance individual preferences against community expectations and traditional requirements. Though modern customization focuses on romantic expression and personal meaning, rather than the family alliance building and social obligation fulfillment that motivated medieval ceremonial adaptations. Modern destination weddings represent evolved versions of medieval pilgrimage marriages and ceremonial travel that you observe, serving similar functions in creating memorable experiences, demonstrating family resources, and connecting matrimonial celebrations to broader cultural and spiritual traditions while adapting to contemporary mobility and tourism industries that medieval people achieved through different but comparable means. The tradition of wedding favours continues medieval gift-giving customs that served important social functions in thanking guests for attendance, creating material memories of celebrations, and demonstrating host family generosity while adapting ancient hospitality requirements to contemporary economic conditions and social expectations that emphasize personal thoughtfulness rather than political obligation or economic display. You discover that modern wedding insurance represents evolved versions of medieval legal protections and community support systems that address the practical risks and potential disasters that could affect important celebrations, while adapting ancient mutual aid traditions to contemporary commercial structures and legal frameworks that serve similar protective functions through different mechanisms. The role of wedding planners in contemporary celebrations evolved from medieval traditions involving community elders, family matriarchs, and ceremonial specialists who possessed essential knowledge about proper procedures, social expectations, and ritual requirements, while adapting traditional knowledge systems to contemporary professional specialization and commercial service industries. Modern wedding registry traditions preserve medieval dowry customs and gift coordination systems that you witness serving similar functions in helping couples acquire necessary household goods while managing family expectations and community contributions. Though contemporary registries emphasize personal choice and convenience rather than the economic necessity and social obligation that characterized medieval matrimonial support systems, the tradition of wedding rehearsals continues medieval concerns about ceremonial correctness, participant preparation, and avoiding embarrassing mistakes during important public rituals while adapting ancient practice traditions and community instruction systems to contemporary schedule constraints and professional coordination requirements that serve similar functions through different organizational methods. Contemporary wedding dress preservation customs represent evolved versions of medieval traditions involving ceremonial clothing care, family heirloom creation, and material culture transmission that you observe serving similar functions in maintaining family connections and preserving important memories while adapting to different textile technologies and storage capabilities that medieval families achieved through different but comparable preservation methods. The modern emphasis on wedding themes and decorative coordination reflects medieval understanding that ceremonial environments must create appropriate atmospheres for important life transitions while communicating family values and social aspirations. Though contemporary decoration emphasizes aesthetic appeal and personal expression, rather than the symbolic communication and religious significance that motivated medieval ceremonial design choices, historians continue to discover new connections between medieval and modern wedding traditions that reveal remarkable cultural continuity alongside adaptation and innovation. With contemporary celebrations preserving essential social functions and symbolic meanings while adapting to changed economic conditions, religious practices, and lifestyle patterns that demonstrate both human creativity and cultural persistence across centuries of social transformation. The relationship between medieval wedding traditions and contemporary celebration customs reveals how deeply historical practices continue to influence modern life in ways that most people never recognize, creating invisible cultural inheritance that connects contemporary couples to centuries of human experience, while also demonstrating remarkable adaptability in maintaining essential